Book 13. The Battle Among the Ships. Now that Zeus had brought Hector and his Trojans as far as the ships, he left them to hard fighting and endless misery. He turned his bright eyes away, and fixed them in the far distance upon the horsemaster Thracians, and the close fighting Mysians, and the proud Hippomolgi, who drink mare's milk, and the Abii, most gently bred of all mankind. He looked no longer on Troy, for he thought that none of the immortals would step in to help either Trojans or Danaans. But my lord Earthshaker kept no blind man's watch. He had come out of the sea, and climbed to the highest peak of Samothrace. From there he could see the whole of Ida. He could see the city of Priam, and the Achaean ships. There he sat, amazed at the battle. He pitied the Achaeans in their defeat, and great was his indignation against Zeus. Down from the mountain he came in long strides. Hills and forests trembled under the immortal feet of Poseidon, Earthshaker. 3 strides he made, and the 3rd brought him to his goal, Aegis. For there is built his famous palace in the depths of the water, all of shining gold, incorruptible forever. There he harnessed the brazen-foot horses to his chariot, swift flyers with manes of golden hair. He clothed himself in gold, and caught up the whip of wrought gold, and mounted the car. Then he set out over the waves. The monsters of the deep knew their master well, and gambolled about him on all sides. The sea parted before him in gladness. The horses flew quickly along, and there was no wet on the bronze axle. Bounding over the waves, they brought him to the Achaean ships. There is a vast cave at the bottom of the deep sea, midway between Tenedos and rocky Imbros. There Poseidon Earthshaker stabled his horses, and gave them ambrosial fodder. Then he shackled them with fetters of gold, which nothing could break or loose, and left them to await their master's return, while he went to visit the Achaean army. The Trojans, like fire and tempest, were following close upon Hector, one roaring and yelling mass. Now they thought they would take the ships. Now they would lay low their enemies beside them. But Poseidon Earthholder Earthshaker was there, come up out of the sea to put courage into the Achaeans. He took the shape of Calchas with his great voice, and first he addressed the undaunted pair of namesakes. "Aeus Telamonian, Aeus o Iliades, you two must save your nation. Fight away, men, never think of flight. Indeed, I have no fear for the other places. Let the Trojans get over the wall. Our people will hold them. But I am terribly afraid something may happen where that madman is leading like a flame of fire, Hector, who boasts he is the son of Zeus Almighty. Now then, you two, may God put it in your heart to stand firm and encourage the others to hold out. Then you can keep him away from the ships, try as he may, even if the Olympian himself drives him on." As he spoke, Earthshaker gave each a tap with his wand, and filled them with stern courage. He made their limbs light, the feet and the hands upon them. Then he left them in a flash, like a hawk which hovers a while over some lofty cliff, then darts to earth after a bird. Aeus the runner knew him at once, and said to his friend, "That was one of the gods of Olympus in the shape of our diviner telling us to fight. That was not Calchas, our interpreter of birds. I knew him at once by the way his feet and legs moved from behind. The gods are easy to know. He tells us to fight, and my own heart makes me want to fight more than ever. My legs are marching underneath, my arms are moving up above." The Telamonian answered, "The same with me. My hands are gripping the spear, my heart is beating high, my feet are dancing along, 1-2, 1-2. I'm ready to stand alone and fight Hector Priamedes at his maddest." See the joy of battle which the god had put into their hearts. While these two were talking thus, Earthshaker was in the rear, where the defeated men were having a little rest. They lay about by their ships, exhausted by the hard struggle. It was cruel pain to see the enemy swarming over the wall. Tears filled their eyes, for they hoped no longer to escape destruction. But Earthshaker passed quickly through the ranks and tried to rally them, Teucros first, and Leitos, Peneleus, Thoas, Deipyrus, Meriones, Antilochus, all the leading spirits he whipped up with reproaches and did not spare them. "Shame on you, men! Are you only a lot of boys? You were my trust for defending our ships, and if you are going to shirk from the struggle, the day of defeat has dawned. Here I do declare is a miracle wrought before my eyes, a dreadful thing which I never thought to see, Trojans marching upon our ships. All this time they have been like fidgety fawns in flight, dinner for jackals and panthers and wolves, scampering about anyhow, cowards with no fight in them. All this time they would not stand up against our strong hands and stout spirit, not a bit. Now they have left their city behind. Now they fight in the middle of our camp, all because of an incompetent leader and slack followers. The men quarrel with their master and will not defend their own ships. The enemy kill them among their own ships. Even if Agamemnon, our king, is really and truly to blame because he insulted Prince Achilles, it is our duty to fight, and fight we must. Come, now, let us atone. Good men are ready to give way when the offender wants to pay. It is an ugly thing that you go neglecting your duty, and you, the best men in the army. I would not quarrel with a wastrel who didn't want to fight, but you make me indignant from the bottom of my heart. You sluggards! You will soon make bad worse by your slackness. Find a place in your hearts for shame and regret, for here is a great struggle upon us. Here is Hector fighting among our ships. Hector, the hero, has broken down our gates and their crossbars. Such was the earth-shaker's rousing speech. The battalions soon rallied about Aeneas and the runner, strong again now, and such as neither Ares nor Athena could decry. There the best men, the pick of the army, awaited Hector and his Trojans. Spear against spear, shield against shield, in one long fence, man pressing on man, helmet on helmet, buckler on buckler, the helmets with nodding plumes and horns touching together. So close they stood, their spears interfolded and balanced like warp and weft on the loom. The men looked straight to their front, impatient for the fray. But the Trojans came battering on in a great mass. Hector led them with irresistible rush. Like a boulder torn from the brow of a cliff by a swollen torrent, which eats under the stubborn stone and sends it bounding up and down, tearing through the trees. Unswerving, it rolls and rolls until it reaches the level plain. There it comes to a standstill and rolls no more. So Hector threatened to traverse camp and ships right down to the sea, slaying as he went. But when he met those massy battalions, he came to a standstill close against them. The Achaeans faced him, stabbing with swords and spears, and thrust him from them. He gave way, staggering. Then he shouted aloud to his Trojans in piercing tones, "Trojans, Lycians, Dardanian men of war, stand fast! Not long shall the Achaeans bar my way, although they have made themselves like a stone wall. They will yield to my spear, I think, since I am sent indeed by the greatest of the gods, the loud thundering Lord of Hera." Each man felt his spirit rise at these words. Then Deiphobus Priamedes in proud confidence advanced with light, easy step under cover of the tall shield which he balanced before his feet. Meriones made a cast at him and hit the great oxide, fair and square, but the blade did not go through. The shaft broke off at the socket. Deiphobus braced the shield away from his body, daunted at this blow, but Meriones retired in dudgeon, both for the lost victory and the broken spear. He went away to fetch another spear, which had been left in his hut. The fight went on with incessant cries and shouts. Teucros was the first to kill his man, Imbrios, the spearman, whose father Mentor was famous for his horses. He lived in Pedion before the war and had to wife Medesicaste, a bastard daughter of Priam. But as soon as the Achaean fleet arrived, he came back to Ilios and lived with Priam, who treated him like his own sons. He had distinguished himself in the field. Teucros stabbed him under the ear and pulled out the spear. He fell as a mountain ash is felled on a far-seen summit and brings its soft leafage upon the ground. So he fell in his clashing armor. Teucros sprang forward to strip off the spoils, but Hector cast a spear at him as he came on. Teucros had kept him in his eye and dodged the cast by a slight movement, but the spear hit Amphimachus in the chest as he was entering the battle, and he fell with a thud in his clanging armor. This man was the son of Cteatus Actorion. Hector was advancing to pull the helmet from his temples when Aeneas lunged at Hector. But none of his flesh showed. He was all covered with armor, and Aeneas hit only the boss of his buckler. However, the heavy blow pushed him back behind the two bodies, and the Achaeans drew them away. Amphimachus was taken to the rear by two Athenians, Stichous and Menethius. Imbrios was carried off on the shoulders of Aeus Telamonian and the other one. They were like a pair of lions which have torn a goat from the sharp teeth of a pack of dogs, carrying it in their jaws well above the thick bushes. So these two men carried off the dead body and spoiled it of arms and armor. Then Iliad, in revenge for the death of Amphimachus, cut off the head and with a swing sent it rolling through the crowd like a ball. It rolled up to Hector and lay before his feet in the dust. Amphimachus was Poseidon's grandson, and his death made Poseidon very angry. He ranged through the Danaan ships and camps, spurring them on to fight and make trouble for the enemy. It happened that Idomeneus met him on his way from a friend who had just been brought in with a wound in the ham. Idomeneus had given charge to the surgeons, and he was now going to his own hut, for he meant to return to the battle. Then Poseidon spoke to him in the voice of Thoas, who was the lord of all Pleuron and hilly Calydon in Aetolia, and a man highly honored by his people. He said, "Idomeneus, my lord of Crete, where are your threats? Where are the boasts of the Achaeans against Troy, vanished into thin air?" Idomeneus answered, "No man is to blame so far as I see, Thoas, for we all know how to fight. No one fears, no one plays the coward, no one shrinks or slinks away. This must be the pleasure of Cronion Almighty, as I take it. He wishes the Argives to perish here, far from Argos, without a name. But you were always indomitable, always rallying the laggards. Keep it up, then, and let your voice be heard." Earthshaker said, "Idomeneus, may that man never see his home again who this day shall shrink from fight of his own will. May he be sport for carrion dogs in this place. Come on now, take your arms and come with me. We must do our best together, although we are only two, and see whether we can help. Union is strength, even with poor creatures, and we, too, could show fight against the best." Then he went back to join the melee, a god among the men. But Idomeneus equipped himself in the hut and took his two spears. He strode out in shining armor like a thunderbolt falling from high heaven with flashes of lightning, a portent for mankind. His attendant Meriones met him as he left the hut, for he had come back to fetch a spear. And Idomeneus said to him, "My good Meriones, why have you left the battle? Is that what your quick feet are for, my good friend? You must be wounded. Is there an arrow hurting you somewhere? Or is there a message for me? I don't want to dawdle in the hut, I can tell you. I want to fight." Meriones answered, "My lord Idomeneus, I have come to find a spear if I can. I have broken the one I had against the shield of Deiphobus." Idomeneus said, "Spear, is it? You will find 1 spear or 20 spears standing in a row in my hut. Trojan spears, which I take from their dead. It is not my notion of fighting to stand half a mile away, so I have quite a stock of spears and shields and shining corselets." Meriones said to this, "So have I. Plenty of Trojan spears in my hut and in my ship, but all a long way off. I don't forget my duty any more than you do, let me tell you. Whenever there is a fight, there I am in front. Perhaps some of our people may not notice me, but I am sure you know it." Idomeneus answered, "I know your courage. What is the use of saying that? If the best men were being picked now for an ambush, that shows who has courage and who has not. The coward changes color, flitter, flutter. He can't sit quiet with a firm spirit, shuffles from one knee to the other, or squats on his two hams. His heart goes pit-a-pat, and his teeth go chitter-chatter as he thinks of death. The brave man does not change color. He is not too much afraid when he finds himself in the ambush. He prays they may come on soon. In that case, no one could think little of your courage or your hands. If you were hit in the fight by blade or by arrow, the wound would be in breast or belly. You would be prattling sweet nothings in the front rank, not running away to be shot in the neck or back. But come on, don't let us stay talking like children, or they will be really too hard on us. Do go in and get your spear." Meriones lost no time. He got the spear and went after Idomeneus in high spirits. When Ares, the pest of mankind, marches out to war from Thrace, with Panic, his mighty, indomitable son, who scares the strongest men to fight, They may join the Ephorins or they may join the Phlesians, but they do not listen to both sides. They give the victory only to one. Such another pair were Idomeneus and Meriones, as they marched out to join the battle, armed from head to foot. Meriones said to his friend, "Where do you think we had better go, my dear fellow? Right, or center, or left? I think that is the place where they most need help." Idomeneus said, "In the center there are others to defend the ships, Aeneas and his second, and Teucros, the best archer we have, and good also in a stand-up fight. They will harry Hector Priamedes till he has enough of it, however strong he may be. It will be a steep climb for him to beat men like those and burn the ships, fight as he will, unless Cronion himself throw a blazing torch upon them. Telamonian Aeneas would yield to no man alive if he's a man and lives on bread, if steel or stones can break his bones. Even Achilles could not beat him, that is, in stand-up fight, for Achilles could beat any man in chasing a flying foe. But for us, keep to the left, this way, and we shall soon know whether we are to win name and fame or someone else." Accordingly, they moved to the left. When the Trojans saw Idomeneus blazing in his armor and his friend with him, they shouted to one another and rushed at them all together. Then there was a furious conflict under the sterns of the ships. It was like a storm of shrieking winds when the dust on the roads is thickest, blowing up the dust in great whirling clouds. The battle bristled with spears as they hacked and killed. Their eyes were dazzled with the sheen of glittering helmets and burnished corselets and shining shields in wild confusion. Hard would the heart be that could see such a conflict without pity. Such were the calamities which the two mighty sons of Cronos brought upon the fighting hosts by their conflicting wills. Zeus willed victory to Hector and the Trojans, to magnify the name of Achilles. Yet he did not desire the whole Achaean race to perish before Troy, but only wished to magnify Thetis and her heroic son. Poseidon was for the Argives. He slipped out secretly from the sea and supported them, because he was aggrieved at their discomfiture and indignant against Zeus. Yet both came of one father and one family, although Zeus was older and had more experience. Therefore Poseidon did not openly help them, but secretly always encouraged them in the form of a man. So the two gripped the rope of war and tugged away over both armies with strong pulls, never breaking or loosing it while they loosed the knees of many a man. Then Idomeneus, though grizzled with years, calling his people to follow, leapt on the Trojans and drove them back. He killed Othryoneus of Kybissos, a sojourner in the land who had lately come to join the war. He had asked in marriage the most beautiful of Priam's daughters, Cassandra, bringing no marriage gifts, but promising to drive away the Achaeans by force of arms, a great feat indeed. Priam betrothed his daughter to him, and he was fighting in faith. But as he swaggered forward, Idomeneus hit him, drove his spear through the man's corselet into the belly, and he fell with a thud. Then Idomeneus called out, "I congratulate you, Othryoneus, as the happiest man in the world, if you really contrive to do what you promised to Priam Dardanides. He has promised his own daughter to you, and now hear what we would offer, and do it too. We will bring the most beautiful of Agamemnon's daughters from Argos, and you shall have her, if you will join us in sacking the city of Priam. Come along to the ships, and let us make a contract of marriage. We will not be greedy in the matter of marriage gifts." Then he began to drag him away by the leg. But Asius came to defend him. He was on foot in front of his car, and the driver kept the horses close behind, breathing upon his shoulders. He fully meant to bring down Idomeneus, but the other was first, and ran him through the throat under the chin. He fell as an oak tree falls, or a poplar, or a tall pine felled by shipwrights in the forest to make a ship's mast. There he lay stretched before his chariot, groaning and clutching at the blood-stained dust. The driver was frightened out of what wits he had, and durst not turn the horses to drive away. So Antilochus pierced him also through corselet and body. He rolled out of the car, gasping, and Antilochus drove the horses away. Deiphobus now came up to avenge Asius, and made a cast at Idomeneus. But Idomeneus had his eye on the man, and crouched down behind his shield, a great shield of oxhide, like a figure of 8 with 2 rods to hold it in shape. The spear grazed it with a dry clang, and passed over. But the cast was not fruitless, for it struck Hypsenor Hippacides in the liver under the midriff and laid him low. Then Deiphobus cried out, exultant, in a terrible voice, "Not unavenged lies Asius there, and he will be glad, I think, that I have sent an escort with him, if he must go down to Hades, the keeper of the gates." The boastful words were bitter to the Argives, most of all to Antilochus. But he did not forget his friend. He straddled across the body and covered it with his shield, while two of his companions stooped and carried him away, groaning, Mecistius and Alastor. Idomeneus went on wild as ever, ready to die himself or to send his enemies down into the dark. Next he brought down Alcathous, the son of King Isaetes. His wife was Anchises' eldest daughter, Hippodamia, one very dear to her parents. She excelled all her year's mates in beauty and intelligence and clever handiwork, and so she had the best man in Troy for a husband. This man Poseidon gave into the hands of Idomeneus. He enchanted his eyes and shackled his limbs so that he could neither move away nor move aside, but he stood still like a stone pillar or a tall tree, while Idomeneus ran his spear crashing through the corselet of bronze which had saved his body so long. But now the metal rang dry as the spear went through into his heart. He fell, and as the heart beat, the shaft quivered. Then at last Ares suffered the blade to abate its fury. But Idomeneus cried out, exulting in a terrible voice, "Shall we call that a fair deal, then, Deiphobus? 3 dead men for 1? That was your boast, I think. Well, come on yourself and stand up to me, my man. Let me teach you how true a son of Zeus confronts you. Zeus first begat Minos to be warden of Crete. Minos begat Deucalion, and Deucalion begat me to be king of broad realms in Crete. And now here I come over the sea with destruction for you and your father and your countrymen." Deiphobus hesitated whether he should try alone or go back to find someone to support him. It seemed best to look for Aeneas. He found him behind the rest, nursing his everlasting grudge against Priam, because Priam paid no honor to so valiant a man. He told him his mind without more ado. "Aeneas, my noble prince, if you care anything for your kith and kin, now is the time to show it. Save your good brother. Come with me, and let us rescue him. He was no more than your sister's husband, yet he brought you up from a little tot in his own house, and Idomeneus has just killed him." This aroused Aeneas, and he rushed on Idomeneus in fury. But Idomeneus did not run away like some pampered boy. He stood his ground like a wild boar in the mountains, which awaits a rabble of men in a lonely place. The bristles shiver on his back, his eyes flash fire, he whets his tusks to beat off men and dogs. So Idomeneus stood his ground, spear in hand, awaiting the assault of Aeneas. He looked round for his companions, Ascaphalus and Apharius and Deipyrus, Meriones and Antilochus, and called to them in plain words, "This way, my friends, and help me. I am alone, and I see Aeneas coming on at a great rate. He is a terrible man, a rare killer, and he is young and strong, which is the greatest thing of all. If we were of one age, we should soon see who would win, he or I." They all came at once, and stood by him, grounding their shields and leaning them against their shoulders. Aeneas called to his own friends, Deiphobus and Paris and Agenor, captains like himself in the Trojan army, and their men followed as sheep follow the weather to water from the grass. And as that sight warms the shepherd's heart, so it warmed the heart of Aeneas to see the men following him. So they rushed into conflict about Alcathous with their long spears, and the metal of their armor rang ding-dong with the dints. The two champions, Aeneas and Idomeneus, furiously attacked each other. Aeneas cast first, but Idomeneus had his eye on him and dodged the spear. It struck in the ground, quivering. A strong throw, but a miss. Idomeneus pierced Oenomaus through the plate of his corselet and split his bowels. He fell clutching at the earth. Then Idomeneus pulled the spear out of the body, but he could not strip the arms. There were too many shots flying about. His knees and ankles were not firm as they used to be, and he could not charge after his own throw, or get out of the way. So he stood where he was and defended his life. He could no longer leap nimbly out of danger. As he moved slowly away, Deiphobus, who was full of undying hate against him, cast again. He missed again, but hit Ascalaphus, piercing the shoulder, and Ascalaphus fell in the dust, clutching handfuls of earth. He was the son of Ares, but Ares did not yet know that his son had fallen. His uproarious voice was silent, his strong arm was still. He sat on Mount Olympus under the golden clouds, held fast by the will of Zeus, with the other immortals who were there, restrained from taking part in the battle. Now there was a general scrimmage over Ascalaphus. Deiphobus tore off his helmet, but Meriones leapt forward and cast. The spear ran through his upper arm. The helmet fell banging to the ground. Meriones pounced on him like a vulture, pulled the spear out of his arm, and ran back. Polites, the brother of Deiphobus, threw his arms round his waist and helped him out of the melee to the place where his chariot was waiting in the background with the driver. They drove him back to the city, groaning in pain as the blood ran from the wounded arm. Amid the din and confusion, Aeneas found himself opposite to Aphareus, Callitor's son, and ran his spear through the man's throat. His head drooped to one side, shield and helmet collapsed over him, and death ravished his spirit. Antilochus watched until Thoas turned his back and lunged at him, cutting through the vein which runs up the back to the neck. He fell flat in the dust, stretching out both hands to his friends. Then Antilochus leapt on him and stripped off his armor, looking round as he did so under the shelter of his great shield. The Trojans struck at the shield from all sides, but they could not touch his body, for Poseidon Earthshaker protected old Nestor's son amid the shower of blows. Indeed, he was never free from his enemies, but turned on them again and again. His spear had no rest, but shook and stabbed forever. He was ever ready to cast or to attack. Now Adamas Asciades noticed what he was doing. He drew near and struck the shield in the middle, but Poseidon's sea-blue hair grudged the life and confounded the spear. It broke in half, and one part stuck in the shield like a charred stake, one part fell to the ground. Adamas retreated among his friends to save his life, but Meriones followed up and stabbed him between mid-nipple and groin, the most painful wound for miserable mortals in the changes and chances of war. The man bent over the spear, struggling as a bull struggles when bound and dragged with twisted ropes by his keepers in the highlands. So for a little while he struggled and gasped, until Meriones came up and pulled the spear out of his body. Then darkness came over his eyes. Next Helenus, in close fight, struck Deipyrus on the helmet with his great Thracian sword, and smashed off the helmet. It was dribbled about among the feet of the fighting men until one of them picked it up. The owner was dead by this time. This infuriated my lord Menelaus. He shouted defiance and made for Helenus, balancing his spear, and Helenus drew his bow. So both let fly at the same time, one the spear and one the arrow. Helenus hit the plate of his enemy's corselet, but the arrow glanced off as black beans or chickpeas jump off a broad shovel on the threshing floor from the winnower's fling in a stiff wind. So the arrow glanced off the breastplate and fell far away. But Menelaus hit the hand which was holding the bow and ran through, the hand and bow together. Helenus escaped to his friends, dangling his arm and dragging the spear after him. Agenor drew out the spear and bound up the hand with a twist of sheep's wool, which his man happened to have with him for a sling. Now Pysandros made for Menelaus, but fate was leading him straight to his end, to be brought low by your hand, Menelaus, in that dreadful battle. They approached. Menelaus cast wide. Pysandros hit his shield. The spear did not go through, but snapped off at the socket. Pysandros was glad and thought he had won, but Menelaus drew sword and leapt on him. Pysandros pulled out from under his shield a fine axe with a long handle of polished olive wood, and they came to handy strokes. Pysandros hit the other's helmet on the end of the horn just below the plume. As he came on, Menelaus hit him with the point which pierced his forehead above the base of the nose. The bone broke, and both eyes fell bleeding in the dust beside his feet. He doubled up in a heap. Menelaus set one foot on his chest and stripped off the armor, crying out in triumph, "That's the way you shall say goodbye to our ships, I think, you presumptuous Trojans. Never satisfied with your violence after all the insults and outrage you have done to me, you dirty dogs. And you did not fear the wrath of loud-thundering Zeus, the protector of the hospitable house, who shall yet destroy your city utterly. You robbed me of my wedded wife after you had been guests in her house, and away you sailed with my wealth quite reckless. Now you want to set fire to our ships and slay us all. No, somewhere you shall be stopped. Fight as you will. Oh, Father Zeus, thy wisdom, they say, is above all, both men and gods. Yet from thee come all these things. See what grace thou showest to violent men, these Trojans, whose spirit is ever ungovernable, who cannot have enough of battle and warfare. Sleep and love are very sweet, song and dance with tripping feet, yet a time comes when they fall. You can have enough of all, but these Trojans never can have enough of war. While he said this, he was stripping off the armor and giving it to his companions. When all was done, he went forward again to the fighting line. There another man leapt at him, Harpalion, the son of King Pylaemenes, who had come to the war with his father, but never went home to his native land. He struck the shield of Menelaus at close quarters, but he could not drive the spear through. He was retiring to shelter among his friends, glancing watchfully on every side, when Meriones let fly an arrow at him and hit the right buttock. The arrow went through under the bone to the bladder. He sat down where he was and breathed his last in the arms of his Paphlagonian comrades. There he lay stretched out like a worm, and his red blood soaked into the ground. His friends took charge of him and drove him back to the city, mourning. Behind them came his father, weeping bitter tears, and no blood price was paid for his dead son. But his death moved the heart of Paris, since the man had been his friend and host among the Paphlagonians, and he took a shot in revenge. There was a man there, the son of Polyidus the diviner, one Euchenor of Corinth, a man both wealthy and brave. He knew well what his fate would be before he embarked, for the good old man Polyidus had told him often enough that he was either to die of a cruel disease in his own house or to fall by a Trojan hand in the great war. So he avoided two evils at the same time, the fatal disease and a heavy fine, and saved himself a great deal of discomfort. Paris hit this man near the jawbone under the ear, a quick death for him when the darkness took him. So the battle went on like blazing fire. But Hector heard nothing of it. He did not know that his people were being beaten on the left of the ships, and soon the Achaeans would have won the victory. Such was the help that Poseidon, Earthholder, Earthshaker, gave to them, by encouragement and by his own strength. But Hector kept where he had first entered the gate and broken the Danaan battalions. That was the place where the ships of Aeus and Protesilaus were drawn up in close lines along the shore. There the wall was lowest, and there was the most desperate contest of men and chariots. There Boeotians and Ionians, Locrians and Thyians and redoubtable Epeans hardly kept off his furious assault from the ships, for he was like a flame of fire. They could not push him back and get themselves clear, not even the picked men of Athens. Their commander was Menestheus, the son of Peteos, and under him Phidus and Stichios and sturdy Bias. The Epean leaders were Meges, Phyleus' son, and Amphion and Dracius. The Thyians were led by Medon and Podarces. Medon was a bastard son of King Oileus, and so he was a brother of Aeus. He lived in Philice, having left his country because he killed a brother of his stepmother Areopis. The other was the son of Iphiclos Philicides. These two, then, were in charge of the Thyians and attached to the Boeotians on this day. But Aeus, the runner, also the son of Oileus, would not stir 1 inch from the Telamonian. They stuck together as close as a pair of oxen breaking the fallow and pulling at the plough like one. The sweat oozes and trickles at the roots of their horns. Only the yoke holds them apart, as they pull might and main and cut their furrow across the field to the headland. There is the very picture of big Aeus and little Aeus, keeping close side by side. Telamonides indeed had plenty of strong men behind him to relieve him of the weight of the shield when he was tired and the sweat ran down to his knees, but there were no Locrians with plucky Oileades. They were not the men for close fighting. They wore no bronze helmets with plumes. They had no round shields or good ashen spears, but bows and slings of twisted yarn were their trust. With these they shot thick and fast to repel the Trojan battalions. So then the front ranks met Hector and his Trojans behind their armor, while the others volleyed from shelter. The Trojans thought no more of fight, for the arrows threw them into disorder. Then the Trojans would have been driven back in this ignominious way from ships and camp, but Polydamas again offered advice to his bold leader. "Hector," he said, "you are an obstinate man. You will never listen to persuasion. Because God has given you prowess in war above all others, therefore you will be wise above all others. But you can't have everything at once. To one, God promises prowess in war. To another, he gives an understanding mind. This brings profit to many men. This saves many, as one who has it knows best himself. Well, I will tell you what seems best to me. Here is all this ring of war blazing around you. Our people have got over the wall. Some of them stand off armed and idle. Some still fight against odds, scattered among the ships. You should go back and summon all the best men. Let us discuss every plan, whether we should fall on the ships and trust God for victory, or retire while we can. Indeed, I am afraid myself that the Achaeans may pay back the debt of yesterday, since that insatiable glutton for war is still there, and I think he will not hold quite aloof from this battle." This advice seemed good to Hector, and he said simply, "Very well. I will go to the front and send back the chief men. You keep them here as they come. Then I will come back at once." Away he went through the ranks, towering above them like a mountain, and calling for the men he wanted, who came back to Polydamas as they were told. He went on, looking for Deiphobus and Helenus, Adamas and Asius, but these he could not find. They were no longer safe and sound. 2 were lying dead, slain by the Achaeans in front of the ships. 2 were in the city, wounded or shot. But one he did find soon, on the left of that lamentable battle, Prince Alexandros, encouraging his men to fight. As he drew near, he reproached him bitterly. "Damn you, Paris, you handsome coward, you woman-mad seducer! What have you done with heroic Deiphobus and princely Helenus, and Adamas Societies, and Asios Hirtacides? What have you done with Othryoneus? Now the tall castle of Troy is ruined, out and out. Now dire destruction is sure." Alexandros replied, "You are blaming an innocent man now, Hector. I may have shrunk back once from the battle, but not now, for my mother's son is not quite a weakling. Indeed, from the time when you began this attack upon the ships, we have been enjoying the society of the Danaans all the time. Our companions whom you asked for are dead. Only Deiphobus and Helenus have gone off. I think they both had spear wounds in the arm, but Cronion spared their lives. Now then, give your orders just as you wish. We will follow with all our hearts, and I don't think fight will be lacking so far as our strength goes. But a man cannot fight beyond his strength, try as he will." He calmed his brother's mind with these words, and they passed on to the thickest and hardest of the fray, round about Cebriones and Polydamas, Phalces and Orthius, heroic Polyphetes and Palmis, Ascanius and Morris, 2 sons of Hippotion, who had come from Ascania in relief the morning before. Then Zeus gave them spirit to fight. They moved like a tempest of stormy winds that swoops on the earth under the thunder of Father Zeus and mingles with the waters amid tumultuous noise, the waves dashing and splashing over the roaring, seething sea, curved and crested, first one line and then another line. So rolled the Trojans on, first one serried line and then another line, a sea of metal flashing and crashing as they marched behind their leaders. Hector Priamedes was in front, looking like man's evil genius, the god of war himself. Before him he held his well-balanced shield made of thick oxhide and overlaid with bronze. On his temples was a shining helmet with nodding plumes. At every point he tested the opposing battalions, advancing under cover of his shield to see if they would give way. But the Achaeans, undaunted, stood their ground. Aias first came striding out and challenged him. "My dear man, come close. Why do you try to frighten Argives? That is useless. We are not unacquainted with battle, although the cruel scourge of Zeus has humbled us. I doubt not it is your hope to destroy our ships, but we also have hands to defend them. Before that, I tell you, that noble city of yours is like to be taken and sacked by our hands. For yourself I say the time is near when in flight you shall pray to Father Zeus and all gods that your horses may be swifter than falcons and carry you into your city over the dusty plain." As he said this, a lucky bird appeared on the right, an eagle flying high. The Achaean army took heart at the omen and cheered loudly. Then Hector answered, "What nonsense you do talk, Aeneas, you blundering lout! I wish I were as certain to be the son of Zeus Almighty with Queen Hera for my mother, and to be worshipped like Athenia and Apollo, as this day now here is certain to bring ruin for the Argives one and all. And among them you shall die yourself if you dare to face my long spear, which will tear your lily-white skin. You shall feed the carrion dogs and vultures of Troy with your fat and your flesh as you lie in front of your Achaean ships." Then he led the way, and his people followed with loud cheering, while all the army behind cheered loudly. The Achaeans raised their answering cheer and stood to await the Trojan champions ready for the contest. The noise of the two hosts resounded to the glorious heavens of Zeus. Book 14. How Hera deluded Zeus and sent him to sleep, and how in consequence the tide of battle turned. We left Nestor in the hut over his wine. Although he was busy with this, he did not fail to hear the uproar outside, and he said to the wounded man bluntly, "Machaon, my dear sir, what do you think is going to come of all this? There's more noise over there by the ships with these young hotheads shouting. You just sit and drink your wine until Hecamede warms the water and washes your wound. I'll find a gazebo somewhere and have a look round." He picked up the shield of his son Thrasymedes, which lay in the hut. He had taken his father's, and chose a good sharp spear and went out. But standing where he was, he could easily see the shameful sight, the wall knocked down and men in rout and Trojans chasing at their heels. The old man's mind was now heaving blindly like the sea when it purples with a long groundswell, foreboding the shrill courses of whistling winds, but uncertainly, for the waves do not roll forward either way until some decided blast comes down. So he was in doubt between two, whether to join the Danaan mass or to seek out King Agamemnon. At last he decided for Agamemnon and left the men killing each other, while the hard metal cracked and rang under the dint of swords and spears. On his way, Nestor met the princes who had been wounded coming up from the ships, Tydides and Odysseus and King Agamemnon, for their ships were a long way off from the battle, drawn up in lines near the sea. But they had run the first ships high and dry, and the wall had been built close under the sterns, for no beach, however wide, could have held all the ships, and the army had not much room, so they had arranged them in lines and filled the whole width of the shore which the headlands of the bay enclosed. The princes then were coming up together, leaning on their spears to see how the battle was going, and they were deeply despondent. There the ancient man met them and filled them with consternation. Agamemnon said, "My lord Nestor Nelides, why have you left the battlefield? Why are you here? I fear that terrible Hector will fulfill the boast he made to his Trojans, that he will never return to Ilios until he had burned the ships and killed us all. That is what he said, and here it is, coming true. I do declare the whole nation have a grudge against me like Achilles, and they will not fight even before the sterns of their own ships." Nestor said, "Yes, here it is plain before our eyes, and not even Zeus Thunderer himself could undo it. The wall is in ruins, and we thought it would be an impregnable defense for ships and men. Here's the battle beside our ships, no rest, no pause. Stare as hard as you like, you can't tell which way the Achaeans are being driven. Nothing but a muddle, and men being killed, and the noise resounds to heaven. Do let us consider what is to be done, if wits are any good. But the battle is no place for us. A wounded man cannot fight." Agamemnon said, "Nestor, there they are, fighting close under our ships. The wall we built was of no use, nor the moat where everyone worked so hard. We did hope it would be an impregnable defense for ships and men. But it must be the will and pleasure of Zeus that the Achaean nation should perish, far from Argos, without a name. I knew it when he was ready to defend the Danaans. I know it now when he magnifies the enemy as if they were very gods and shackles our hands and spirits as he has done. Well then, this is my advice. Let us launch the first ships that lie near the sea and moor them afloat by anchor stones and wait for the blessed night. if that will make them cease fighting. Then we can draw down all the other ships. Yes, to flee from trouble is quite right, even if you flee by night. Better fight and run away than tarry to be caught next day." Odysseus said to him with a frown, "Curse you, Atrides. What a saying to let slip between your teeth. I wish you had some other army to command, some contemptible army instead of us. Zeus, it seems, has given us from youth to old age a nice ball of wool to wind, nothing but wars upon wars until we shall perish every one. Is that how you mean to leave the great city of Troy, for which we have suffered such hardships? Be silent, and let no other Achaean hear these words, which no man ought to let pass his lips if he knows what decent talk is like, much less a sceptred king, and one who is at the head of all these nations that you are lord of. What you said just now seems to me simple nonsense. Here in the middle of battle and war, you tell us to launch our ships, that you may give the enemy their heart's desire. They are victorious already, and you want to destroy us utterly. For our men will not keep up the fight while the ships are being launched. They will be always looking behind their backs and slinking to the rear. Then your plan will destroy us, most potent captain." Agamemnon answered, "Oh, Odysseus, you have cut me to the heart by that cruel reproach. If the people do not wish to launch the ships, I do not ask them to do it. I only wish someone could tell us of a better notion. Let him be young or old, I should be glad indeed." Then Diomedes spoke up. "The man is near. We shall not have far to look, if you will only listen and not be offended because I am the youngest in this company. But I come of good blood. I am the son of Tydeus, who lives in his grave in Thebes. I am descended from Portheus, lord of Pleuron and Calydon. He had 3 sons, Agrius and Melus and Oeneus, my father's father, the most valiant of them all. My father left home and settled in Argos by the will of heaven. He married a daughter of Adrestus. He had a rich estate, plenty of wheatlands, plenty of orchards, plenty of flocks and herds. He was the most notable spearman in the nation. You must know whether I tell the truth. So you cannot call me low-born or weakling as any reason for disregarding what I say. Come on, let us go to the battlefield. If we are wounded, we can't help that. We must keep out of range ourselves, or it may be one wound upon another. But we can rally the others and encourage them. I mean, those who pleased their temper and would not fight." All agreed to this, and Agamemnon led the way to the battlefield. But the famous Earthshaker kept no blind man's watch. He saw them go, and went after, taking the shape of an old ancient gaffer. He took hold of Agamemnon's right hand, and said in plain words, "Your Grace, now I guess Achilles is reet fain in that cruel heart of his, when he sees blood and rout among us, for he has no sense in his head, not a jot. May he be damned so, may God whistle him down. But that a reet, the blessed gods bain't angered wi' thee, not they. Do bide a bit, and thou'st see yon good lords and captains dusting across the plain to home." Then with a great shout he scampered away. The voice of Lord Earthshaker sounded from his chest as loud as the noise of 9,000 or 10,000 men shouting in hot battle, and every man of the Achaean host, as he heard, felt the strength increase within him to fight on and never yield. But Queen Hera stood on a peak of Olympus watching. She knew him at once, her own brother and her husband's, and glad she was to see him so busy in the battle. She saw Zeus, also seated on Ida among the mountain brooks, and a hateful sight she thought him. She began at once to scheme how she might beguile him, and this seemed the best plan. She would prink herself out for a visit to Mount Ida, and entice him to lie by her side in love, so that quiet and balmy sleep might drown his eyes and mind. So she went to her chamber, which her own son Hephaestus had built for her, with doors closed by a secret lock which no other god could open. She closed the doors, and first she washed every speck and stain from her lovely body with a bath of ambrosia. She anointed her body with oil, ambrosial, soft, scented with perfumes. Do but stir it, and the fragrance fills the whole palace of Zeus, with its brazen floor, heaven above and earth beneath. She combed her shining hair, and plaited long ambrosial braids to hang from her immortal head. About her she draped an ambrosial robe, which Athena had made so smooth and embroidered with beautiful patterns. She fastened this with golden pins at the breast. She put a girdle round her waist with 100 dangling tassels, and hung in her dainty ears earrings with 3 mulberry drops, delicate and graceful. She spread over her head a new and beautiful veil, white as the sunlight, and upon her feet she laced her shapely shoes. When all was done, she issued from her chamber and called Aphrodite apart to tell her a secret. "Will you do something for me, dear child, if I ask you? Or are you too angry with me for favoring the Danaans, and will you say no?" Aphrodite replied, "Say what you want, my gracious queen. I will do it with all my heart if I can do it, and if it is doable." The artful queen answered, "Give me now your charm of love and desire, with which you subdue both mortal men and immortal gods. I am about to visit the ends of the earth, to see Oceanus, the father of the gods, and Tethys, their mother. You know they took me from Rhea's hands and brought me up and cared for me in their own house, at the time when Zeus all-seeing thrust Kronos down below the earth and the unvintaged sea. I want to see them and make up their old-standing quarrel. They have been at odds for a long time, separate in bed and board, because of some grudge or other. If I can persuade them and bring them together again as loving as before, they will love me and make much of me forever." Aphrodite said with a smile, "I could not say no to that, and I ought not, for you sleep in the arms of Almighty Zeus." So saying, she took out of her bosom the broidered strap with all the charms worked in it. There is love, there is desire, there is lover's tender prattle, the cajolery which deceives the mind of the wisest. She dropped it into Hera's hands and said, "Here you are. Tuck this into your bosom, this embroidered strap in which everything is worked. I do not think you will fail in winning your heart's desire." Queen Hera smiled with her lips and her limpid eyes, and smiling, she laid it in her bosom. Aphrodite returned into the house, and Hera sprang from the heights of Olympus. One step to Pieria, one step to Emathia, she sped over the snowy mountains of the Thracian horse-masters, stepping on the topmost peaks, for her feet did not touch the level ground. From Athos she stepped over the sea to Lemnos, the realm of princely Thoas. There she met Sleep, Death's brother, and grasped him by the hand as she said, "My dear Sleep, you are the lord of all gods and all mankind. This is not the first time you have done something for me. Listen to me once more, and I will be grateful to you all my days. Lull me the bright eyes of Zeus under his brows as soon as I shall have lain by his side in love. I will reward you with a fine throne, incorruptible, made of solid gold. My son Crookshank Hephaestus shall make it with all his best craftsmanship, and a footstool underneath to rest your soft feet upon while you drink your wine." Sleep answered, "My most gracious and honored queen, any other of the immortal gods I could easily put to sleep, even the stream of Oceanus, who is father of all, but Zeus, Cronion, I would not dare to come near, nor could I put him to sleep unless he should himself command me. I have learnt a lesson from your requests once before, that time when the ambitious son of Zeus sacked Troy and sailed away. Then I did indeed lay the mind of Zeus Almighty by drowning him in deep slumber, and you made a dangerous plan. You raised a tempest upon the sea, and drove Heracles far away from his friends to Kos. When Zeus awoke, he was very angry, and knocked the gods all over the place. But he wanted me most of all, and if he had found me, he would soon have got rid of me, thrown me out of heaven into the sea, if Night had not saved me. She can tame both gods and men. I took refuge with Night, and by he was pacified, for he was loath to offend Night. And now you tell me to do another desperate thing." Queen Hera said again, with a look from her limpid eyes, "My dear Sleep, why do you worry about all that? Do you think Zeus will be as angry about Trojans as he was about his own son? Look here, I will give you one of the young Graces. You shall woo her and wed her. You shall have Pasithea, whom you have always wanted." Sleep was delighted and said, "Very well. Swear me an oath by the inviolate water of Styx, touching Mother Earth with one hand and the glittering sea with the other. Call to witness the gods below with Kronos, and swear on your honor that you will give me one of the young Graces, Pasithea to wit, whom I have wanted all my days." Hera swore the oath as he asked, and called to witness all the gods under Tartarus, who are called the Titans. When the oath was finished, the two passed swiftly through the air, clothed in mist, leaving Lemnos and Imbros behind, on their way to Ida, mother of wild beasts, among the mountain brooks. They left the sea at Lectos, and passed over the dry land with the tree-tops waving under them. There Sleep waited before Zeus could see him. He took the shape of a whistling bird, which the gods call Chalcis, but mortals call Semindis, and he perched on a lofty pine, tallest of all the trees which then grew on Ida. It pierced through the mists into high heaven. There he stayed, hidden among the foliage. Hera walked quickly up to Gargarus on the top of Mount Ida, and Zeus, cloud-gatherer, saw her come. When he saw her, what love filled his heart! He felt then as he did when first they mingled in love, that time when they had gone to bed and their parents knew nothing about it. He rose and stood before her, saying, "Why, Hera, whither away so fast? What brings you here? I don't see the chariot and the horses." His artful queen answered, "I am going to visit the ends of the earth. I want to see Oceanus, the father of all the gods, and their mother Tethys, who brought me up and cherished me in their own house. I want to reconcile their old quarrel, for they have been at odds this long time, and keep apart in bed and board for some grudge or other. My horses are down at the foot of the mountain, ready to carry me over moist and dry. You are the reason why I came here. I was afraid you might be angry with me afterwards if I go to the house of Oceanus without telling you." Zeus, cloud-gatherer, answered, "My dear, you can go there by and by. But now let us to bed and take our joy. Indeed, no love of goddess or woman has ever come over me like this in a flood and possessed my heart, not when I was in love with the daughter of famous Phoenix, who brought me Minos and Rhadamanthus. Not when I loved Semele or Alchemy in Thebes, and one brought me mighty Heracles, one Dionysus, the darling of the world. Not when I loved glorious Leto, nor indeed yourself. Never was I in love so deeply as I love you now, and sweet desire holds me captive." His artful queen said, "You dreadful creature, what a thing to say! You want to make love on the top of a mountain where anyone can see. What if one of us gods should see us asleep and go and tell tales to the whole family? I couldn't get up from this bed and go straight home. I should be ashamed. If it is really your wish, if you are bent upon it, there's my room for you, built by Hephaestus, with good strong doors. Let us go and lie there, since you are pleased to desire bed." Zeus, cloud-gatherer, answered, "My dear, you need not be afraid that god or man will see. I will gather about us such a golden cloud that Helios himself could not see through, and his sunlight is the strongest light there is." As he spoke, he took his wife in his arms, and under them the earth divine made a bed of fresh new grass to grow, with dewy clover and crocus and hyacinth soft and thick, which raised them high above the ground. There they lay, and a beautiful golden cloud spread over them, from which fell drops of sparkling dew. While the father lay motionless on the top of Gargarus, mastered by love and sleep, with his wife in his arms, Sleep ran quickly to the Achaean ships with news for Poseidon Earthshaker. As soon as he came near enough, he blurted out, "Have your way now, Poseidon. Help the Danaans. Give them victory just for a little, while Zeus is still asleep. I have drowned him in soft slumber myself. Hera has enticed him to bed with her." Then he was gone to his work among the nations of mankind. But he left Poseidon more eager than ever to support the Danaans. He leapt to the front and shouted, "Look here, men, are we going to let Hector Priamedes beat us again? Is he to take our ships and triumph? That's what he says, that is his boast, because Achilles is in the sulks and keeps out of it. We shall not miss the man much if we do our best to help ourselves. Listen to me now, and do what I tell you. Let us take the best and biggest shields in the camp, and put on the most shining helmets, and seize the longest spears we can find, and then forwards! I will lead you, and I don't think Hector Priamedes will stand before my charge. If there is a staunch fighting man who has only a small buckler, let him give it to some worse fellow with a larger shield, and take his." So Tydides and Odysseus and King Agamemnon marshalled them in spite of their wounds, and went about everywhere changing the gear. The good man took the good armor, and gave his worse gear to a worse man. When all was properly arranged, they marched forward. Poseidon Earthshaker led them like a thunderbolt of war, holding a terrible sword, long and sharp. No man may meddle with him in the deadly combat, but fear holds them back. On the other side, Hector marshaled his forces. Then came the most dreadful tug-of-war between sea-blue-hair Poseidon and Hector the brilliant hero, the Trojans behind one, the Argives behind the other. The sea rolled up to the Argive camp and ships, and the armies met with deafening war cries. Not so loud are the waves of the sea booming against the land when it rolls in from the deep before the blusterous northeaster. Not so loud is the roar in the glens of a blazing mountain when fire leaps upon the forest. Not so loud is the shrieking wind in the treetops, the angriest wind that roars, as the terrible noise of Trojans and Achaeans shouting and yelling while they leapt to their struggle for life and death. Hector first cast a spear at Aeus, who was turned full towards him. That cast was no miss. He struck his chest in the place where the shield strap and sword strap crossed. They saved his body from a wound. Hector was angry that his cast had no effect, and stepped back into safety. As he retired, Aeus picked up a large stone. There were many such knocking about under the feet of the men, mooring stones for the ships. One of these Aeus lifted high and threw it at Hector. The stone went over the shield rim, and striking his chest near the neck, sent him spinning like a top with the blow. Round and round he went all over the place, and fell flat in the dust. He was like a tree struck by lightning and torn up by the roots, with a vile smell of sulphur, enough to daunt anyone who saw it close, for dangerous is the thunderbolt of Zeus. The spear fell from his hand. Helmet and shield collapsed over him in a heap. His armor crashed and clanged about him. Then the Achaeans ran at him, shouting, volleying, stabbing, hoping to drag him off. But no one could touch him, for there were good men about him by this time, Polydamas and Aeneas and Agenor, Sarpedon the Lycian and Glaucus, and the others also did their parts, holding their round shields before him. His friends lifted him with their hands and carried him out of the battle to the rear, where the driver was waiting with horses and chariot. So he was driven back towards the city, groaning heavily. When they reached the ford of the river Xanthos, they laid him on the ground and poured water over him. Upon this he came to himself and opened his eyes. He sat up on his knees and vomited blood. Then he fell back upon the ground, still dazed from the blow, and his eyes closed again. The Argives assaulted more furiously than ever when they saw Hector retire. Aeus the runner first of all leapt upon Satnios, the son of a water naiad, who was born while his father was tending herds beside the river Satniois. Aeus caught him up and stabbed him in the flank, which laid him flat, and there was a general combat about his body. Polydamas Panthuides, defending him, threw his spear at Prothoenor. It ran through the right shoulder, and Prothoenor fell, clutching at the earth. Polydamas shouted loud in triumph, "Lo and behold, there's one more spear not wasted when it leaps from the firm hand of Panthuides. One of the Argives has caught it in his body, and he will have something to lean on as he hobbles down to Hades." This taunt infuriated the Argives, and Aeus in particular, the Telamonian, who was close by where the man fell. Quickly he made a cast while Polydamas was moving back. Polydamas dodged aside and saved himself, but it caught Archelicus, Antenor's son, who was doomed by Providence to die, as it seems. The point struck where head and neck joined at the top of the spine and cut through both sinews. Head and nose and mouth hit the ground before legs and knees came near it. Then Aeus shouted out, "Think a moment, Polydamas, and answer me truly. Is not that man's life a fair price for Prothoenor? He does not seem to me a common man, or a son of common people. He must be Antenor's brother, or his son. He is exactly like him in looks." He knew him well all the while, but his taunt provoked the Trojans. Then Acamas straddled across his brother and stabbed Boeotian Promachus, who was trying to drag the body away by the feet. Acamas shouted out triumphantly, "Champion bowmen you Argives are, and too fond of boasting. I don't think we shall be the only ones to suffer and sorrow. Some of you shall die here beside us. See how your Promachus lies asleep, and my spear brought him down. I would not have my brother's blood prize long unpaid. That is why a man prays to have one of his kinsmen left, that he may save the family from disgrace." This boasting speech enraged the Argives, and Peneleos most of all. He rushed at Acamas, but Acamas did not wait for him. So he attacked Ilioneus. This man was the only son of Phorbas, whom Hermes loved most of all the Trojans, and blessed his wealth, so that his flocks were many. Peneleos stabbed him at the root of the eye, under the brow, and tore out the eyeball. The spear went through the eye and out at the nape of the neck, and the man sank down, stretching out both hands. Peneleos drew his sword and cut right through the neck. Head and helmet fell to the ground, with the spear still sticking in the eye. Then Peneleos held it up for the Trojans to see, like a poppy head on a long stalk, and cried, exulting, "Kindly send word to the father and mother of his honor Ilioneus to arrange for the mourning of their son at home. For the wife of Procomus Aligenorides is in the same case. She will not have the joy of meeting her beloved husband when we Achaeans return home from Troy." They trembled in every limb to hear these words, and each man looked about to see how he might escape death. Now the battle had turned, and many of the Achaeans lifted the blood spoils of their enemies. Telamonian Aeus stabbed Hirtios Gertiades, the mission captain. Antilochus despoiled Phalces and Murmeros. Meriones killed Morus and Hippotion. Teucros brought down Prothoon and Periphetes. Then Atrides stabbed Prince Hipporenor in the side and let out his bowels. His soul flew quickly out of the wound, and darkness covered his eyes. But Aeus o Iliades killed more than any other, for he was a quick runner, and no man was like him for running down those who ran away when Zeus put fear into their hearts. Book 15. How Zeus awoke, and what he said to Hera. How Hera took his message to the divine family, and what they all said to it, and how the two armies fought among the ships. Thus the Trojans were driven over the moat and stakes, and many had fallen. Now they halted beside their chariots, pale with fear, terror-stricken. But Zeus awoke on Mount Ida by the side of Hera, his consort. He sprang up and stood looking at the battlefield. There were the Trojans in rout. There were the Achaeans pelting in pursuit, with Lord Poseidon among them. There was Hector lying on the plain, and his companions sitting around him, and he, dazed, breathing heavily, vomiting blood, for no weak hand had dealt that blow. The father of the gods and men was moved with pity to see the man, and he said to Hera with an angry frown, "This is another of your evil schemes, you unmanageable creature. Your trick has driven him from the battle and routed his people. I should not be surprised if you were sorry by and by for your wicked web spinning, when you get the first taste of the fruit and a good thrashing from me. Don't you remember how I hung you up with two great stones tied to your feet and a golden chain round your wrists, too strong for anyone to break? There you dangled in the clouds. The gods were indignant, but they could not go and set you free. Anyone I caught I picked up and hurled from the threshold, and down he came to the earth with very little breath left in his body. Even that could not console me for my intolerable anxiety about Heracles when you seduced the storms to send him before the north wind over the sea, and then landed him in Kos. Another of your mischievous plots. I saved him from Kos indeed, and brought him back to Argos after many hardships. I'll give you cause to remember all this, and stop your deceits. You shall soon find out if you get any good by your loving and your bedding, and by coming all this way to deceive me." Hera shivered at these words and protested. "I call on earth to witness, and the broad heavens above, and the force of Styx, which is the most solemn oath of the blessed gods, and your sacred head, and our own marriage bed, which I would never lightly name. It is not my doing that Poseidon Earthshaker plagues Hector and the Trojans, and helps the other side. I suppose his own temper moves him, and pity for the Achaeans hard-pressed beside their own ships. Why, if he would take my advice, he would follow wherever you lead, Thundercloud." The father of gods and men smiled and answered very much to the point. "Ah, yes, my dear lady, if only you could have one mind with me as you sit in our family circle, Poseidon would soon change his mind to suit yours and mine, however much he might want something else. But if you are really speaking the truth, go home and tell Iris and archer Apollo to come here. I want to send Iris to tell Poseidon that he must stop meddling in the war and go home. And I want Apollo to breathe courage into Hector again, and make him forget the pain that torments him, and send him back to the battle. The Achaeans are to be turned again in headlong flight, and to fall back on the ships of Achilles. He is to put up his friend Patroclus, and Hector is to kill Patroclus under the walls of Ilios, after he has killed many other fine fellows, and among them Sarpedon, my own son. Then Achilles, in revenge for Patroclus, is to kill Hector. After that I will make the Achaeans sweep the Trojans away from their camp completely, and they shall take the city according to Athena's plans. But meanwhile I will not relent, and I will not allow any other of the immortals to help the Danaans here until I fulfill the desire of Pelides, as I promised to do, and bowed my head to confirm it, on that day when Thetis embraced my knees and prayed to me to give renown to Achilles." Hera durst not disobey. As quickly as the mind of a man can move when he had travelled far over the wide world and remembers many places, as he thinks, "I would be there or there," and there he is. So Hera flew quick as thought from Ida to high Olympus. She found the immortal gods assembled in the hall of Zeus. All rose and held up their cups in welcome. She took no notice of the others, but she accepted the cup from Themis, who had run first to meet her, saying without ceremony, "My dear Hera, why have you come? You seem upset. I'm sure your lord and master has given you a fright." Hera replied, "Goddess alive, don't ask me. You know yourself what his temper is, the hard-hearted tyrant. Just sit down and take charge of this meal. I'll tell you about it, and everyone shall hear what wicked things he talks of doing. I don't think it will be equally pleasant to everyone, man or god, if there is any one of our party who still feels comfortable." Hera sat down as she spoke. Everyone in that hall was disquieted now. Hera laughed with her lips, but there was no warmth on the forehead above those black brows, as she turned towards the whole company and said with indignation, "We are fools to harbor rebellious thoughts against Zeus, just silly. We still want to walk up and put a stop to him by main force or by plain talk, and he sits by himself and takes no notice, simply doesn't care. He says he is the best god among us and the strongest, yes, decidedly. So you had better keep whatever nasty little gift he sends each of you. There is one parcel of trouble, I believe, ready for Ares. His favorite son has been killed in battle. Ascalaphus, at least Ares calls him son." At this Ares slapped his two thighs with his open hands and cried out in doleful tones, "Now don't be surprised, my good Olympians, if I go and pay out those Achaeans for my son's death. Yes, even if my fate is to be struck by a thunderbolt from on high, and I have to lie with a heap of corpses in the blood and dust. Here, terror and panic," he shouted, "my horses!" and proceeded to put on his armor. And now there would have been another quarrel between Zeus and the whole family, worse and more dangerous than the quarrel in the Achaean camp. But Athena saw the danger for their own peace, left her seat, dashed out of the door after Ares, tore the helmet off his head and the corselet off his shoulders, pulled the spear from his fingers and put it back in the stand, and rated him roundly. "You're mad! You're crazy! You're done for! You have ears, but you don't hear. You have no sense or decency. Don't you take in what Hera says, straight from Olympian Zeus? Do you want to do no end of mischief, and then come home miserable as you'll have to do, and bring disaster on all the rest of us? He will leave Trojans and Achaeans on the spot, and go for us, ramping into Olympus, grabbing one after another, innocent and guilty. Forget your son, I tell you. Many a better man and stronger man than he has perished, or will perish as time goes on. It is a difficult thing to save the whole human race. As she spoke, she pulled Ares back to his seat, still furious. But Hera called Apollo outside with Iris, who was the errand girl in the divine household, and said without more ado, "Zeus says you must go to Ida as quick as you can. When you have entered the presence, do what his lordship commands you." Hera went back to her seat, and the other two went flying to Mount Ida, where the wild beasts breed among the running brooks. There they found Cronades all-seeing, seated upon the heights of Gargarus in the midst of sweet-scented clouds. They came and stood before Zeus Cloud-gatherer, and he was not displeased that they had so quickly obeyed the summons. And first he told Iris her mission in a few plain words. "Off with you, Iris, my quick one. Give this message to Lord Poseidon, and be no untruthful messenger. Tell him to stop fighting, to leave the war and join the divine family, or go down into the sea. If he disregards my words and will not obey, tell him to consider carefully whether he is strong enough to stand up against me. Remind him that I am far more powerful than he is, and elder-born, yet he does not shrink from calling himself equal to me whom the others fear." Iris obeyed. Swift as the wind she flew from Ida to Ilios, swift as the snow or hail which falls from a cloud when the cold blast of Boreas blows. She alighted beside the earth-shaker and spoke. "A message for you, earth-holder sea-blue-hair. I bring a message from Zeus Almighty. He bids you stop fighting and leave the war, to join the divine family or go down into the sea. If you disregard his words and will not obey, his lordship threatens to come to this place and fight you force against force. He bids you keep clear of his hands, for he says he is far more powerful than you are and the elder-born, yet you do not shrink from calling yourself equal to him whom the others fear." The earth-shaker angrily replied, "Confound it, that is a tyrant's word, though he may be strong. I am his equal in rank, and he will constrain me by force. We are 3 brothers, the sons of Kronos and Rhea, Zeus and I, and Hades, who rules the lower world. All was divided among us in 3 parts, and each has his prerogative. We cast lots, and I got the sea, Hades the gloomy darkness, Zeus the broad heavens high amid the clouds. Earth and Olympus were left common to all. Therefore I will not live at the beck and call of Zeus. Let him enjoy his own share in peace, even if he is a strong one. But let him not think to scare me with his strong hands as if I were something contemptible. He would do better to try scolding and scaring his own sons and daughters, who must obey whether they like it or not." Iris said, "Then that is your answer which I am to report to my master, Earth-holder Sea-blue-hair? So stubborn and stiff? Or will you change a bit? The noblest natures you will find are not too stiff to change their mind. You know how the avenging spirits always attend the elder-born." Then Poseidon Earthshaker answered, "Iris, my dear goddess, you are quite right. A messenger with news to bring should understand the proper thing. But I tell you, it hurts me through and through, when I am his partner and I have an equal share, and yet he wants to scold me with angry words. Look here, I will give way, though it makes me indignant. But let me say something more. Here is a threat which I mean to carry out. If he goes against me, and Athena, and Hera, and Hermes, and Hephaestus, and spares Ilios, if he will not destroy this city and give victory to the Achaeans, between us two there will be hatred which nothing can heal." With this, the Earthshaker left the battlefield and dived into the sea, and the Achaeans missed him badly. Then Zeus Cloud-gatherer said to Apollo, "Now, my dear Phoebus, you go to Hector. Earthshaker has disappeared into the sea at the threat of my wrath, or others would have heard of our feud. I mean the gods in the underworld, Kronos and the rest. But it is much better for us both that he kept clear of my hands, or the matter would not have been settled without sweat. Here, take my tasseled aegis cape, shake it well over the Achaeans, and put them to flight. Your business, Shooter-far, will be to take care of Hector. Inspire him with courage and strength until the Achaeans are driven right down to the Hellespont. After that I will consider what is necessary to do and say, that they may recover from their defeat." Apollo shot down from Ida like the dove-killing falcon, the swiftest of winged things, and alighted near Hector, who was sitting up now. He had come to himself and knew his friends round him. The heavy breathing and sweating ceased when the will of Zeus revived him. Apollo said, "Prince Hector, why are you here fainting and far behind the others? Are you in trouble of any sort?" Hector, half-dazed, replied, "And who are you, most potent god, who stand before me asking these questions? Do you not know that Aias knocked me down with a big stone in front of the ships and drove me out of the battle when I was killing his comrades? I really thought I was going to breathe out my last breath today and go down among the dead men." Apollo said, "Take courage when you see what a helper Cronion has sent from Ida to stand by you, Phoebus Apollo Golden Sword, the same who has long protected you and your city. Now command your chariots to drive in a body upon the enemy ships. I will go before you and turn back the Achaeans and make a smooth road for your horses." At once Hector was filled with new spirit. Like a stallion horse which has fed his fill at the manger and breaks the halter, off he goes, clattering over the plains, head high and mane flowing over his shoulders, while proudly he gallops along to the mare's feeding ground. So nimble-foot, nimble-knee Hector hurried about, ordering his men to do as the god commanded. And what of the battle? As countrymen with dogs hunt a horned stag or a wild goat, but steep rocks or dark thickets save him, since to catch him was not their lot. Then a bearded lion, disturbed by their cries, appears on the path, and suddenly drives them back from the chase. So the Danaans all this while had been hunting their enemy in packs, and stabbing with spears and swords. But when they saw Hector ranging the ranks, they were afraid, and their hearts sank down to their heels. Then up spoke Thoas among them, the best man of the Aetolians, one who knew his spearcraft, and a good man also in a stand-up fight. In conference, too, there were few of the whole nation better when the young fellows debate together. Thoas kept his head and cried out, "Upon my word, here is a miracle which I see with my own eyes. Hector has escaped, and here he is risen again. We all hoped he was really and truly dead, and Aias Telamoniades had killed him. But some god has saved him again. He has killed many of our people, and I expect it will be the same now. The hand of Zeus Thunderer is in this, or he would not appear now full of fight in the front rank. Listen, and I will tell you what to do. We will order the main body to retreat towards the ships, and pick out the best men to make a stand and try to hold him off with spears in rest. I don't think even that furious man will be bold enough to plunge into a Danaan square." Accordingly, Aias and his pair, and Idomeneus, Teucros, and Meriones, and Meges, and their followers, summoned all the best fighting men to face Hector, while the main body began to retreat behind them. The Trojans thrust forward in a body, led by Hector in fine form. Before them went Phoebus Apollo with a cloud about his shoulders, holding the Aegis cape, shaggy, conspicuous, terrible, made by Hephaestus for Zeus to carry and to confound mankind. Holding this in his hands, Apollo led the advance. The Argives stood in a mass to meet them, and a piercing war cry arose from both sides. Arrows leapt from the bowstring, spears shot from steady hands, some to pierce the bodies of strong young men, many to fall between ere they could taste the white flesh, and to stick in the ground, greedy for a taste. So long as Apollo held the Aegis cape unmoving, the volleys hit their mark on both sides, and the people fell. But when he looked the Danaans full in the face and shook it with a loud and terrible shout, he melted their hearts within them, and they forgot their courage. Then, like a herd of cattle or a great flock of sheep chased by a couple of wild beasts in the murk of night, with a sudden attack when the keeper is away, so fled the Achaeans in panic. For Apollo put fear into them and gave victory to Hector and his Trojans. Then man struck man in the scattering battle. Hector killed Stichios and Arcesilaus, one of the chief of the Boeotian captains, the other the great friend of Menesius. Aeneas brought down and stripped Medon and Iasus. Medon was a bastard son of Oileus and brother of Aias, as has been told before. Iasus was the leader of the Athenians, the son of Sphelos Bucolides. Polydamas took Mecistius, Polites took Echios in the front rank, Aegina took Clonius. Paris struck Deiocus from behind in flight and ran him through the end of the shoulder. While they were stripping the armor from these men, the fugitives were tumbling over the stakes and moat and running in all directions and getting behind the wall as they could. So Hector shouted loudly to his men, "Leave the spoils and make for the ships. If I see any man anywhere else and not by the ships, I will kill him on the spot. His family shall never give him his due with fire, but carrion dogs shall tear him under the walls of our city." Then down from the shoulders he put the lash to his horses and called out to the ranks. All cheered and drove on with him with a devil of a din. Before them, Phoebus Apollo levelled down the sides of the ditch with a touch of his feet and filled the hollow. Thus he built a long dam across as wide as a strong man's spear-cast. The men poured over it in mass, Apollo in front holding the precious aegis, and he threw down the wall as easily as a boy playing on the beach who builds his toy castles in the sand and shuffles them down again with his feet. So easily didst thou, O glorious Apollo, confound all the toil and travail of the Argives, and turn them to rout. So the Argives came to a halt beside their ships, appealing to one another, and, lifting up their hands to all gods, they prayed earnestly, every man. Gerenian Nestor most earnestly of all, raising his hands to heaven, offered his prayer. "O Father Zeus, if ever a man of us in Argos has made burnt offering of bulls or sheep, and prayed for a safe return, remember that, Olympian. Save us from this cruel day, and let not Achaeans be thus conquered by Trojans." Zeus all-wise thundered loud, hearing the prayer of old Nelides. But the Trojans attacked still more furiously when they heard the thunder of Zeus Almighty. As a great billow from the open sea rolls over the bulwarks of a ship when a strong wind piles it up as the winds do pile the waves, so the Trojans with a mighty noise came rolling over the wall, and driving their horses to the ships they fought with spears hand to hand. They from their chariots, the others from the ships where they had climbed, using the long-jointed poles shod with bronze which were there at hand. All this while, as long as the battle was outside the walls and far from the ships, Patroclus had been in the hut of gentle Eurypylus, amusing him with talk, and soothing the pain of his wound with plasters of his healing herbs. But when the Trojans came pouring in, and when he heard the noise of the Danaans in rout, he groaned and slapped his thighs, saying in distress to his friend, "I can't stay here any longer, Eurypylus, although you need somebody with you. But just listen to this battle going on. Your man shall attend to you. I must hasten to Achilles and try to make him fight. Who knows whether I may not persuade him with good luck? The persuasion of a friend often brings a happy end." So saying, he went off as fast as his feet would carry him. The Achaeans held their own before the attack, but they could not push off the Trojans, though they were fewer. Nor could the Trojans break the ranks in front of them and get among the ships and huts. The battle was evenly balanced, and kept as straight as a master carpenter's line in cutting a plank. There was fighting in many places, but Hector found himself opposite the ship of Aeus. They fought a duel for the ship, but one could not get the other out and use his fire, and the other could not drive him back, now his luck had brought him there. Caletor, Hector's cousin, brought up a torch to fire the ship, but Aeus knocked him down with his pike, and the torch fell from his hand. When Hector saw his cousin down in the dust beside the ship, he called out, "Trojans, Lycians, brave Dardanians, don't give way in this narrow place. At least save Caletor, who has fallen here among the ships, or the Achaeans will get his armor." Then he cast a spear at Aeus, missed him, but hit his man Lycophron. He lived with Aeus at home, being banished from Cythera after killing a man. The spear struck the man's head over the ear as he stood beside Aeus, and he tumbled out of the ship to the ground. Aeus shivered and said to his brother, "Don't be lazy, Teucros. Here is our faithful friend Mystorides, dead, who was as dear to us as our own parents and lived in our house. Hector has killed him. Where are your arrows of death? Where is the bow that Phoebus Apollo gave you?" Teucros heard and ran up with bow and quiver. He shot arrow after arrow quickly against the attackers. One hit Cleitos, Pisinor's son, the comrade of Polydamas, as he held the reins in his hands. He had trouble with his horses, for he was driving them where the fighting was thickest, to win favor with Hector. But a blow came upon him that no one could help, however much he might wish. for the arrow fell on the back of his neck. He tumbled out of the car, and the horses shied and ran away with the empty car rattling. Polydamas saw this at once, and he was there first to stop them. He gave them over to Astynous, with strict orders to keep them near and watch him. Then he went back to the fighting. Teucros picked out another arrow for Hector, and he would have put an end to the fighting if he had shot the champion, but Zeus was on the watch. He was protecting Hector, and he robbed Teucros of his victory. He broke the bowstring as Teucros drew it at Hector. The bow fell from his hand, and the arrow went off somewhere else. Teucros shivered and said to his brother, "Confound it, look there, how God cuts our plans to pieces. He knocks the bow out of my hand, and he breaks my bowstring, which I put in fresh this morning to stand the strain of all these arrows." Aeneas replied, "Don't waste time. Let the bow and arrows lie there, since God has made a mess of them out of spite against our people. Take a long spear and a shield. Fight yourself, and make others fight. Aye, make them pay dear for their victory if they do take our ships, and let us remember our duty." So Teucros put away the bow in his hut. He slung over his shoulders a shield of 4 hides, and put on a good helmet with a nodding plume of horsehair, and took up a sharp spear. Then he ran quickly to the side of Aeneas. Hector had seen how the shots had been cut short, and he called out loudly, "Trojans, listen, my brave Dardanian friends. Here we are among the ships. Be men, remember your duty and fight. I have just seen the arrows of a champion brought to naught. It is easy to see the mighty hand of Zeus among men, and to discern whom he makes victorious and whom he weakens and will not help, as now he weakens the spirit of our enemies and helps us. Fight, one and all, for the ships. If a man dies by shot or stab, let him be dead. It is no disgrace for him to die fighting for his native land. At least wife is safe, and his children after him. House and estate are unhurt, if once the Achaeans go away to their own country." These words put courage into all. Aeneas, on his part, addressed his companions and roused them to new efforts. "Shame, Argives! Now it is certain we must either drive these men back from the ships or perish. If Hector takes our ships, do you expect to walk all the way home on foot? Don't you hear Hector exhorting all his people to burn our ships with fire? This is a battle, not a dance. For us there is no better plan and no better notion than to have at your enemy man to man. To die at once and have done with it is better than a lingering death. To be squeezed like this among our ships by poor creatures like these." Then Hector killed Schedius, Perimedes' son, the Phocian captain, and Aeneas killed Laodamas, Antenor's son, captain of the foot. Polydamas brought down Selenian Otus, the Epean prince and friend of Meges Velides. Meges saw it and leapt upon him, but Polydamas slipped from under him, and Meges missed his thrust, for Apollo would not allow the son of Panthous to be killed there, but he drove the spear full into the chest of Croesmus. He fell, and Meges began to strip off his armor, but Dolops leapt upon him, the bravest of men, son of Lampos and grandson of Laomedon, a man who could use a spear and knew all the art of war. He struck Velides at close quarters, full on the shield, but he was saved by the plates of his good corselet. This corselet Phyleus had brought out of Ephyra, from the river Celeus. His guest friend, King Euphetes, had given it to him for the war, and this now saved his son's life. Meges next made a stab at the ridge, holding the horsehair plume of his helmet, and cut off the whole plume. Down came the plume and lay scarlet in the dust. While Meges lingered over this fight, hoping to win, Menelaus came to help. He stood behind, unseen, and got Dolops broadside on, then struck at the shoulder. The spear ran through and showed on the other side, as if struggling to get out of his chest, and he fell on his face. The 2 men dashed forward to take his spoils. Then Hector called upon all his brothers, but first he reproached his cousin Melanippus, Hicetaon's son. This man used to keep his herds of oxen in Pacote before the enemy came, but as soon as the fleet arrived, he returned to Ilios and made his mark. He lived in the palace, and Priam treated him like one of his own sons. Hector called him by name with reproaches as he led the way. "What's this, Melanippus? Are we to let him go? Aren't you a bit sorry that your cousin Dolops is killed? Can't you see them fingering his armor? Come along, we can't stand off any more. We must fight till we kill them, or they take Ilios and destroy us all." They were away in a moment, while Telamonius exhorted his own side. "Be-men, my friends! Remember your honor. Remember what your fellows will think of you and your doings in this battle. A little sense of shame will give a better chance for all to live, but he that runs away, that same will do no good and get no fame." They were full of high spirit as it was, but his familiar saws took their fancy. They fenced in their ships with a paling of hard metal, while Zeus excited the Trojans against them. Now Menelaus called out to Antilochus, "You are younger than the rest of us, Antilochus. No one is quicker on his feet or stronger in the fight. Won't you jump out and have a shot at somebody?" Then he was at it again, while Antilochus jumped out of the first rank and looked round. The Trojans all shrank back as he cast a lance, and that was no miss. Melanippus was then just coming into the battle, and it struck him on the breast. Down he fell with a thud, and Antilochus was upon him in a moment to strip him, like a dog pouncing on a wounded fawn when the hunter has shot it jumping out of its harborage. There was a pounce, Melanippus. But Hector saw it and came up at a run. Antilochus did not stay, but used his own quick feet. He was off like a wild beast which has done something naughty, killed a dog or a herdsman, and then runs before the men come up in a pack. Yes, that was how Nestorides ran, with Hector and all the Trojans coursing after him, shouting and volleying like the devil. When he was safe with his friends, he turned and stood. The Trojans rushed at the ships like ravening lions, fulfilling the will of Zeus, who drove them furiously on, and took all the heart out of the Achaeans as their hope of victory faded. For his will was to give triumph to Hector Priamete, to let him make a burning fiery furnace of the ships, and fulfill the unreasonable prayer of Thetis. He watched for the glare of a burning ship, for at that moment he meant to roll the Trojans back from the ships and give the victory to the Achaeans. That was why he urged Hector to attack when he needed no urging. Hector was mad as spear-shaking Ares, mad as a conflagration in some thick forest upon the mountains. There was foam on Hector's lips. His eyes blazed under the shaggy brows. The helmet shook violently on his temples, for Zeus himself helped him from heaven, and brought him honor and glory, fighting alone amidst a host of foes. For his life was to be but a tiny span. Already the day of fate drew near, when Pallas Athene was to bring out Pelides in his might. He tried again and again to break the enemy ranks, where he saw the men thickest and the armor strongest, but break them he could not for all his ardor. They stood close like great stones in a wall, or like a steep cliff over the sea which endures the swift courses of whistling winds and the swelling breakers that burst against it. So stood the Danaans fast and would not yield. But Hector, shining fiery all about, was dashing against the mass, falling upon it as a billow swells up to the clouds before the wind and falls on a ship. She is swallowed up in foam. The dreadful blast roars against the sail. The mariners tremble with fear, for only a hair's breadth saves them from death. So the Achaeans' hearts were torn within them. But Hector was like a savage lion after the cattle while they graze along a marshy bottom in thousands, and among them a herdsman not certain how to tackle the beast over a mangled heifer. The man keeps pace with the first or last of the herd, but the beast leaps into the middle and gorges his kill, while the rest scamper away. So the Achaeans made a rare scampering before Hector and Father Zeus, all but one of whom Hector slew, Mycenaean Periphetes, the son of Coprius, who used to take messages from King Eurystheus to Heracles, the great hero. That mean father begat a son more excellent in every way, fleet of foot and strong to fight, first of his people for intelligence. So Hector's victory was the more honorable. The man carried a tall shield that reached to his feet. When he turned, shifting the shield about, he caught his foot in the rim and fell backwards with the helmet banging about his head. Hector heard the noise and ran up and killed him with a thrust in the chest, close beside his friends. But they could do nothing to help him, for they were too much afraid themselves. They were now in among the ships, and the sterns enclosed them. That is the front line. The enemy kept pouring in. Now the Argives were forced to retire and leave their front ships. They remained all together and did not disperse. Both shame and fear restrained them, and they kept calling to one another. Most of all, Gerenian Nestor besought every man to listen as he loved his parents. "My friends," he cried, "play the men. Have some respect for the opinion of the world. Remember your wives and children, your property, your parents, alive or dead. Let every man remember. In their names, as you think of them far away, I beseech you to stand firm and not give way to panic." While he thus tried to encourage them, Athena dispersed the rare great mist which blinded their eyes. Now it was bright light on both sides, both about the ships and in the hard-fought battle. They could all see Hector and his companions, both those who were fighting a long way off and those who were near the ships. But Aeneas did not choose to remain standing with the other Achaeans in groups. So he went up and down over the decks of the ships, carrying a huge pike used for sea fighting, several lengths jointed together, 22 cubits. He jumped from deck to deck with long strides, like a skillful horse rider. When such a one has picked out 4 horses from the rest and tied them together, see him drive them along the high road towards the city. How the men and women run together and stare as he bounds up and down from horse to horse, quite safe all the time, while they gallop along. So Aeneas bounded along, up and down, from deck to deck in long jumps, while his voice, resounding, filled the sky. And he roared to the Danaans, "Defend your fleet and your camp!" Hector also could not keep still amid his followers, but he swooped upon the black hull of a ship as a brown eagle swoops on a flock of birds feeding by a river, geese or cranes or long-necked swans. And Zeus pressed him from behind with his mighty hand and brought the army with him. Again a bitter fight arose by the ships. You would say they were fresh, unwearied troops, now first in the field, so furiously they fought. But the thoughts of the two armies were very different. The Achaeans feared they would never escape destruction. The Trojans hoped one and all to burn the ships and to kill the men. Hector now caught hold of the stern of a fine ship, one which had brought Protesilaus to Troy, but never carried him home again. Achaeans and Trojans fought for possession of that ship, all close work. No waiting now to be shot at with arrows and spears, but all stood close together with one absorbing passion, and they fought with axes and choppers and swords and spears. The ground was covered with fine-wrought blades, dropped from fighting hands, unslung from shoulders. Blood ran in streams. Hector would not let go of the stern, but kept hold of the ensign, calling to his men, "Fire this way, and cheer all together! Now Zeus has given us a day which is worth everything. He has given us the ships which came here against the will of heaven and brought us so many troubles, all because the old men were cowards and kept me back and wouldn't let the men go when I wanted to attack the ships. But if Zeus all-seeing made us stupid then, now he encourages us and commands us himself." They attacked more violently than ever. Aeneas could no longer stand, for he was overwhelmed with volleys. He left the deck, expecting death at every step, and retired a little way along the 7-foot bridge that led fore and aft. There he remained on guard, repelling anyone who tried to board with fire, and he never ceased roaring, "My friends, brave hearts, true sons of war, prove yourself men, my friends. Remember your duty. Do we think there is anyone behind to help us, or any better wall to save a man from destruction? We have no city near with ramparts to defend us. We have no reserves. We are on the plain of Troy with an armed enemy in front and the sea behind, and our native land far away. Hard hitting must save us. War is no place for kindness." All the while he kept vigorously driving with his pointed spear. Whenever a man rushed at the ship with his fire alight, Aeneas was ready with a prod of the long spear. 12 men he wounded in the fight around the ship. Book 16. How Patroclus took the field in the armor of Achilles, his great feats of war, and his death. While this battle was going on round the ships, Patroclus appeared before Achilles with tears pouring down his cheeks, a veritable fountain, a mountain brook running over the rocks. Achilles was deeply grieved and spoke to him plainly. "My dear Patroclus, why are you crying like a baby? You might be some little girl running to her mother and pulling at her apron and keeping her from her work, and blubbering and looking up and saying, 'Nurse me, mammy, dear.' That's what you look like, my dear man, crying like that. Have you some news for the men, or just for me? Or is it a special message from home to you? Why, your father Menetius is still alive for all we know, and Peleus Yacides is alive and on his throne. We should be sorry indeed to hear of their deaths. Are you really lamenting for the Achaean people? Can't endure to see them falling thick and fast among the ships? It's their own fault, their own tyrannical dealings. Speak out, don't hide it, then we shall both know. Patroclus answered with a groan. Don't be angry, Achilles, my prince, our strong deliverer. Such misfortune has come on our people. There they are, all who used to be best in the field, lying wounded, shot, or stabbed somewhere among the ships. Diomedes Tydides is wounded, Odysseus is wounded, Agamemnon is wounded, Eurypylus is wounded too, shot in the thigh with an arrow. They have the surgeons busy about them with all their medicines, curing the wounds. But there's no curing you, Achilles. I pray I may never have such a grudge in my heart as you have. Curse your courage. What good will you be to anyone from now to the end of the world if you will not save the nation from destruction? Cruel man! Your father was not Peleus, nor your mother Thetis. You are a son of the green sea and the stony rock with that hard heart. If there is some prophecy you are afraid of, which your mother told you from the lips of Zeus, let me go, at least, and take out our myrmidons, to see if there is any hope in that way. Put your armor upon my shoulders, and perhaps the Trojans may think it is you, and give a little rest to our tormented people. Little time to take your breath face to face with sudden death, and it will be easy for us coming into the battle fresh to drive weary men from our camp away to their city. So he prayed, poor fool, for his prayer was destined to bring death and destruction for himself. Achilles replied in hot anger, what have you said, Patroclus, my dear friend? I care for no prophecy, if I do know any. My mother has told me none from the lips of Zeus. But I feel bitter grief in my heart, when here is a man who will rob his equal and take back his prize because he is the stronger. This is a terrible grief to me, and this has been my torment. The girl that the army chose out for my prize, whom I made my own by force of arms when I took that city, that girl my lord King Agamemnon tore from my hands as if I were a foreigner without any rights. But we will let bygones be bygones. I see it was impossible to bear resentment for ever and ever. I did think I should not forget my resentment until fire and battle came to my own ships. You go, then. Put on my armor and lead our brave men into the field, now the enemy have swallowed up the Achaean ships like a great cloud, now that our people have their backs to the sea and only a small space is left them to hold, now that all Troy is here confident, for they see not the face of my helmet shining near them. That would soon rout them and fill the gullies with their dead, if my lord King Agamemnon were kind to me. But now they are fighting round our camp. There is no spear in the hands of Diomedes Tydides, furiously raging to defend the Danaans from ruin. I have not heard yet the voice of my lord king shouting out of his hateful head. But Hector's words of command are breaking upon me. All round his Trojans cover the whole plain with their clamor. They vanquish the Achaeans in fair fight. Never mind. Fall on them and beat them, Patroclus. Save our ships, or they will burn them, and we shall never see home again. But listen carefully while I tell you exactly what to do, that you may win honor and glory for me from the whole nation, and they may send back that lovely girl and handsome gifts besides. When you have cleared them away from the ships, come straight back. If, after that, the loud-thundering Lord of Hera gives you a chance of triumph, never think of fighting on your own account without me. You will steal my honors in that way. Don't be excited by fighting and victory so as to lead our men as far as the city walls, or one of the Olympian gods may meddle. Apollo Shootaphar is very fond of them. You must turn back as soon as you have saved the ships, and let them ravage the plain. Oh, Father Zeus, Athena, Apollo, if only not one single Trojan could be left alive, and not one Achaean but you and I might be left, that we alone might tear off the sacred diadem of Troy. By this time, Aeneas was at the end of his endurance under the showers of blows. He had two forces against him, the will of Zeus and the volleys of the Trojans. The metal of his helmet rang and rattled as the blows beat and beat upon the knobs. His left shoulder was tired with bearing the heavy shield so long. But nothing could shake him, stab and strike as they would. His breath came hard, sweat poured in streams over every limb. He had not a moment's rest, nothing but trouble upon trouble everywhere. Oh, ye divine spirits that inspire the songs of men, help me to tell how the fire first fell upon the Achaean ships. Hector drew near and struck the ashen pike of Aeus with his great sword, at the end, near the socket, and cut it straight through. Aeus brandished the useless pole, and the blade fell on the ground with a clang a long way off. Then Aeus shuddered, for he saw in this the act of God. He knew that Zeus Thunderer was foiling his plans of battle, and meant to let the Trojans win, and he retired out of reach. Then they cast fire upon the ship. It lapped round the stern, and blazed up at once all over the ship. And then Achilles slapped his two thighs, crying out, "Hurry, Patroclus, my friend, be off with your horses. I see fire sweeping about the ships. I fear they may take the ships, and then we shall never get away. On with your armor, and I will wake up the men." Patroclus lost no time. He put on his legs the greaves with silver anklets, next covered his chest with the star-bespangled corselet of Aeacides. Over his shoulders he slung the sword with bronze blade and silver knob, and then the great strong shield. Upon his head he set the helmet with its plume nodding defiance. He took two lances that fitted his grip, but not the spear of Aeacides, for only Achilles could wield that huge, heavy pike, not another man in the Achaean host. This was the strong ashen spear from Mount Pelion, which Chiron had given his father to be the terror of his enemies. The horses he put in charge of Automedon, whom he thought more of than any except Achilles himself, and he trusted him best to be ready at his call in battle. So Automedon harnessed the horses, chestnut Xanthos and piebald Balius, swift as the winds. West wind Zephyros was their sire, and their dam, the harpy Podagra, got in foal while grazing in a meadow beside the stream of Oceanus. In the side traces he put one mortal horse with the pair of immortals, Pedasus, the incomparable, which Achilles had brought back from captured Thebe. Meanwhile Achilles had got the men under arms and marshaled in their camp. They were like a pack of ravening wolves ready for the hunt. How the savage beasts bring down a great antlered stag in the mountains and tear him to pieces with blood-dripping jaws. Then off goes the whole pack to a brook, and they lap up the clear surface water with long, thin tongues, belching out clots of gore. Their courage is high as ever, though their bellies are stuffed. So the Myrmidon leaders and captains bustled about Patroclus, while Achilles was among them, marshalling the chariots and ranks of armed men. 50 ships of war was the fleet which Achilles had brought to Troy. In each were 50 stout fellows on the benches, 5 officers he appointed to command them, under himself commanding-in-chief. One division was led by Menestheus in his resplendent corset. His mother was Peleus' daughter, the fair Polydora, a mortal woman. His father the river god's Percheus, but by repute one Boris, Pereides' son, who brought his bride gifts and wedded her in due form. The second was led by warlike Eudorus, a girl's love-child. His mother, the dancing beauty Polymele, was daughter of Philus. Hermes Agiophontes caught sight of her when the girls were singing on the dancing ground of golden reed Artemis, lady of the noisy hunt. Hermes at once fell in love. Climbing to her chamber, he lay with her secretly, and she gave him a splendid son, Eudorus, fleet of foot and strong to fight. When at last Our Lady of Childbirth had brought him to the light, and he saw the rays of the sun, Eacles, Actor's son, paid his court and made her his wife. Old Philus brought him up with the same love and kindness as if he were his own son. The third was led by Pysandros Mimalides, who was the most renowned spearman in the country after Patroclus. The fourth was under Phoenix, the fifth under Alcimedon, the son of Laerces. As soon as Achilles had arranged them all in their ranks, he gave his last orders in these stern words. "Myrmidon, do not forget all those threats of yours against the Trojans here in camp, and how you have reproached me while my resentment lasted. Would you not say, hard-hearted man, you must have sucked bile from your mother's breast, cruel man, to keep us here against our will? At least let us sail away and go back home, since this poisonous bile is in your heart. How often you came, crowding, to talk at me like that. Now here is the great battle you were enamored of, plain to see. Then let every man keep a stout heart, and fight!" As they heard this rousing speech from their king, they closed their ranks more firmly. Helmets and shields were packed together like the squared stones of a wall which a man builds to keep the strong winds outside his house. Shield pressed on shield, helmet on helmet, man on man. The horsehair plumes on the shining horns nodded and touched, so close they stood. In front of all, 2 men made ready for battle, Patroclus and Automedon, 2 men with one mind, to lead the Myrmidons forward. Achilles returned to his quarters and opened the lid of a fine carven chest, which Thetis Silverfoot had put on board ship for him, full of shirts and woolen rugs and cloaks to keep off the wind. In this was a goblet of fine work. No other man but he ever drank wine from it. No god was honored with libations from that goblet save Zeus the Father alone. This he took out and first cleansed it with sulphur, then washed it in clean water and washed his own hands. Last he ladled wine into it, and stood in the midst of the courtyard and prayed as he spilt the wine, looking up into heaven. Zeus, thunderer, saw him without fail. "O Lord Zeus, Dodonian, Pelasgian, whose habitation is far away, O thou ruler of tempestuous Dodona, and about thee the Seloi dwell, thy interpreters, foot unwashen, ground-bedded. Once indeed thou didst hear the words of my prayer, thou didst honor me, and thou didst strike hard upon the Achaeans. Then grant me now also the boon I crave. I will remain myself where the ships are gathered together, but I send my comrade with many men to fight. Send victory with him, Zeus all-seeing. Make bold the heart in him, that Hector may learn whether my man knows how to fight alone, or whether his hands are invincible only when I go myself into the maul of war. But when he has driven the battle away from the ships, I pray that he may come back unscathed, with all his armor and his warlike companion." Such was his prayer, and Zeus all-wise heard him. Half he granted, and half he refused. To drive the battle away from the ships he granted. To return safe out of battle he refused. Achilles, after his libation and prayer, went into the hut and put away the goblet in the chest. Then he went outside and stood. He still longed to see the battle himself. Patroclus and his force marched on until they found the Trojans. They were like a swarm of wasps with a nest by the road, which boys have been teasing and poking in their way. The poor little fools only stir up trouble for everybody, and if a wayfarer disturbs the wasps by accident, they pour out in fury and defend their home. Just as furious were the Myrmidons when they poured out of their camp with a great noise. Patroclus cried out in a loud voice, "Myrmidons, fellow soldiers of our prince, be men, remember your old valor. Let us win honor for Pelides, who is the best man in this army, and his soldiers are second to none. Let my lord King Agamemnon know his blind madness when he made no account of the best man of all our nation." Then, with courage refreshed, they fell on the Trojans in a swarm, and the ships around resounded with the noise of their shouting. But when the Trojans saw Patroclus and his companions in their shining armor, they were amazed, and the ranks wavered, for they believed that Achilles had thrown off his resentment and made friends again. Every man looked about him for some escape from certain death. Patroclus first cast a spear into the thick of the struggle near the stern of Protesilaus' ship, and hit Pyrrhicnes. This was the leader of the Paeonians, who came with chariots from Amydon on the Axios. The spear went into his right shoulder, and he fell on his back, groaning, while his Paeonians fled in all directions, for they were panic-stricken when Patroclus brought down their leader and champion. He drove them away from the ships and quenched the fire. The Trojans fled in rare confusion, leaving the half-burnt ship, and the Danaans poured in among the ships with a deafening din. As the fire was quenched and the smoke dispersed, it seemed as when Zeus disperses a thick cloud from a mountain top, and light breaks through from the infinite air of heaven, showing the peaks and pinnacles of the rocks. Then the Danaans had time to breathe for a little, but the battle was not over. The Trojans still held their ground, although they had been forced to leave the ships, and they were not yet running pell-mell in rout. There were a number of scattered combats here and there. First Patroclus pierced the thigh of Areilycus at the moment he turned to fly. The spear broke the bone, and he fell flat on his face. Next Menelaus wounded Thoas, where his chest showed over the side of the shield, and he collapsed. Pylades watched his moment as Amphiclus ran at him and lunged at him first, hit the bulging thigh where the muscle is thickest, and cut through the sinews, and darkness came over his eyes. Nestor's 2 sons each brought down his man. Antilochus drove his spear into the flank of Atimneus. His brother Maris ran in front of the body and made a thrust at Antilochus, but Thrasymedes got in first before he could strike and tore the upper arm from the muscles, breaking the bone and killing the man. So the 2 sons of Nestor sent down to Erebus the 2 valiant sons of Amisodorus, the man who bred that raging, destructive monster, the Chimera. They were Sarpedon's men. Iliad leapt at Cleobulus and took him alive when he was hampered in the crowd, but he cut his throat with his sword and killed him on the spot. All the blade grew hot with the blood as death took him. Peneleus and Lycon cast at each other at the same time, and both missed. They ran together and fell to with swords. Lycon sliced at the horn of the other's helmet, and his sword broke off at the hilt. Peneleus struck his neck under the ear, and the blade cut so deep that the head hung over to one side, held only by the skin. Meriones ran and caught Acamas as he was mounting his chariot and stabbed him in the right shoulder. He fell off, and his eyes were dimmed. Idomeneus stabbed Eremus in the mouth. The point came out under the brain and broke the bones. His teeth were knocked out, and both his eyes filled with blood, which spurted up through nostrils and mouth as he gaped. Then the dark cloud of death spread over him. These Danaan leaders got each his man. The rest of the Danaans pounced on their enemies as ferocious wolves pick out lambs and kids from the flock and pounce on them when a careless shepherd has let them go straying over the hills. They tear the poor timid creatures to pieces at sight. And so did the Danaans, while the Trojans forgot they had ever been brave, but remembered to run as if flight had no disgrace. Big Aeneas made a dead set at Hector, determined to spear him, but Hector knew all the tricks of war. He kept his broad shoulders covered with the good ox-hide and watched the whizzing arrows and thudding spears. He knew well enough that the tide had turned and victory was lost. All the same, he stood firm and saved his companions. But now the rout and confusion spread from the ships, as when Zeus spreads the tempest and a cloud comes into the open from the upper air. Now they were all pouring back in a rabble. Hector in his galloping car left the Trojan army as they were trying to get over the moat which was in their way. Many a team galloped off, leaving their masters' chariots in the ditch with broken poles. But Patroclus was close behind, loudly crying, "Kill! Kill!" as the broken hordes filled every path with noise and confusion. The dust rose in clouds. The horses tugged and strained to get clear of the camp. Patroclus drove, shouting, wherever he saw the thickest crowd. Men kept falling out of their cars under his axle-trees. The cars tumbled over, clittery-clattery. Straight over the moat galloped the horses, on and on. "Down with Hector!" was the cry of his heart. To strike down Hector was his one passion. But Hector was far ahead. Panting horses were everywhere, running loose like a roaring torrent when a thundercloud in the autumn pours heavy cataracts on the black earth. The rivers rise in flood, crundles and dimbles are full, and ravines are cut in the mountains. Down come the torrents, tumbling crisscross out of the hills, and destroying the works of men, until they fall roaring into the sea. Such is the vengeance of Zeus upon men who give unrighteous judgments and drive justice far from them, having no regard for the wrath of heaven. Patroclus cut off the front of the routed army and then drove them back towards the ships. He would not let them get back to their city, but kept them in the space between ships and the river and the city walls, charging and slaying until he had exacted the price of many lives. First he struck Pronous and killed him when the shield uncovered his chest. Next he drove at Thestor, who was crouching down in his chariot, dazed with terror. The reins dropped from his hands. Patroclus came quite close and stabbed him in the right jaw, through teeth and all, then dragged him gaping over the rail by the spear and threw him down on his face, as a man sitting on a rock lands a big fish with hook and line. Arrhelaus rushed at him, but Patroclus smashed his head to pieces in the helmet with a stone and brought him down. Then he attacked one after another, Eramus and Amphoterus and Epaltes, Tropolamus Damastorides, Echios and Pyrrhus, Iphius and Euippus and Polymelos Argiades, and laid them all flat on the ground. Sarpedon saw his countrymen falling. He knew them by their dress, for they wore no loin-guard, and he called to them in reproach, "Shame, Lycians! Where are you running? Play up, men! I will meet this man myself. I want to know who he is that sweeps everything before him. Look how many good men and true he has killed." Then he jumped out of the car in his armor, and Patroclus, when he saw, did the same. They leapt at each other, yelling like a couple of vultures on a high rock, shrieking and fighting with beak and claw. When Zeus saw them, he said to Hera, "This is very sad. Sarpedon, whom I love best of all men, is fated to be killed by Patroclus Menetiades. I really don't know what to do. Shall I pick him up out of the battle alive and put him down in his own country, or shall I let him be killed by Menetiades?" Hera said, "Oh, you dreadful creature, you mustn't say that. A mortal man doomed of old by fate, and you want to rescue him from death? Do as you like, but you cannot expect the rest of us gods to approve. Think for a moment. If you send Sarpedon home alive, some other god may want to take his son out of the battlefield. He loves his son too, you know. Many of the immortals have sons fighting before Troy, and you will make them all very jealous. But if you do love him, if you are sorry for him, just let him be killed by Patroclus Menetiades. But as soon as he is dead and done for, send Death and Sleep to carry him back to Lycia, where his family and friends will do the funeral honors with barrow and pillar, for that is the privilege of the dead." The father of men and gods agreed that this was right, but he sent a shower of bloody raindrops upon the earth in honor of his dear son, whom Patroclus was destined to kill on Trojan soil, far from his native land. When they were within reach, Patroclus struck Thrasymelos, Sarpedon's man, in the lower belly and brought him down. Sarpedon cast at Patroclus and missed, but he hit the horse, Pedasus, in the right shoulder. The horse fell crashing in the dust and gasped out his life with a moan. The other two sprang apart with a crack of the yoke, entangling the reins above them. Automedon mended matters by drawing his sword and cutting loose the trace horse. Then the others were righted and drew the reins taut. The two men now came together again for their battle. Sarpedon cast, and the spear passed over Patroclus' left shoulder without touching. Patroclus followed up, and there was no mistake about his cast. He struck where the midriff encloses the beating heart. Sarpedon fell as an oak tree falls, or a poplar, or a tall pine felled by a woodman to make a ship's mast. So he lay in front of his horses and chariot, moaning and clutching at the bloody dust. Like a bull that a lion kills, he tracks a herd and leaps on the bull, and the strong-hearted creature groans in his death between the lion's jaws. So, under the blow of Patroclus, the strong heart of the Lycian warrior struggled with death, and he called his comrade by name. "Waste no time, Glaucus. You are a warrior among men. Now ply your spear and show yourself a warrior. Now let dreadful war be your heart's desire, if you are good at need. First, bring up all our best men to fight for Sarpedon. Then fight yourself with your own blade. I shall be your shame and disgrace all your days forever if the Achaeans strip me fallen before their own ships. Stand firm and bring up our people, all." Even as he spoke, the end came, and death closed his eyes and nostrils. Patroclus set foot on his breast and pulled out the spear, bringing the midriff with it. He dragged out life and blade together. His myrmidons caught the panting horses, which would have run away now that the chariot had lost its masters. But Glaucus heard these last words with bitter pain. His heart was wrung that he could not help. He took hold of his arm and pressed it, for he was in great pain from the arrow where Teucros shot him in his attack on the wall, and he prayed aloud to Apollo Shoot-afar, Hear me, Lord, in the happy land of Lycia, or in Troy. Thou hast power everywhere to hear an afflicted man, as I am afflicted now. Here I have a cruel wound. My arm throbs from side to side with sharp pains. The blood will not dry. My shoulder is heavy. I cannot hold a spear steady, or go and fight with my enemies. A man is slain, the best of men, Sarpedon, the son of Zeus. But the father helps not the son. I beseech thee, Lord, heal this cruel wound. Lull the pains, give me strength that I may summon my comrades and make them fight, and fight myself for the body of my dead. Apollo heard his prayer. In a moment he stilled the pain. He dried the blood that ran from the wound. He put courage into the man. Glaucus knew it in his heart, and he was glad that the god had quickly heard his prayer. First he went round, urging the Lycian leaders to fight for Sarpedon. Then he repaired at good pace to the Trojans, Polydamas and Panthoides and Agenor, Aeneas and Hector the mighty man himself, calling upon them in plain words, "Look here! Hector, you have quite forgotten your allies. They wear themselves out for your sake, far from home and friends, and you will not help them. Sarpedon lies dead, the leader of the Lycian spearmen who ruled his country with justice and his own strong arm. Brazen Ares has brought him down by the spear of Patroclus. Do stand by us, friends. Let your hearts be moved with indignation. Do not suffer the Myrmidons to strip him and maltreat his body in revenge for the Danaans whom we have killed in fair fight beside their own ships." The Trojans were thrilled with grief, every inch of them, pangs intolerable, unendurable. For he was the mainstay of their city, although a foreigner. There was a large force with him, and he was ever their champion in the field. They went straight for the enemy at full speed, led by Hector, eager for revenge. But the Achaeans were set on by the rousing voice of great-heart Patroclus Menetiades. He began by calling Aeneas and his namesake, who were ready enough. "Now then, Telamonian, now then, runner, let it be your pleasure to have at the enemy. Be as good as you ever were, or better. Sarpedon lies dead, the first man who jumped upon our wall. Come along, if only we can revenge ourselves on his body, and strip the armor from his shoulders. If any of his friends try to help him, we can give them our spears." This was no more than they wished themselves. When both sides were there in force, Trojans and Lycians against Myrmidons and Achaeans, they joined battle with terrible shouts, and how their weapons crashed and smashed. Then Zeus drew a dreadful darkness over the conflict, that the battle for his son might be dreadful and desperate. At first the Trojans drove back their enemies, for a man was struck down who was by no means the least among the Myrmidons, Epygeus, the son of Prince Agacles. Epygeus had once been ruler of Budion, but he had killed one of his cousins and took revenge with Peleus and Thetis Silverfoot. They sent him to war at Iliad along with Achilles. He was taking hold of the dead man when Hector smashed skull and helmet with a large stone. He fell dead over the body. Then Patroclus, provoked by his comrade's loss, rushed at him straight like a hawk scattering daws and starlings. "That was a fine pounce of yours, Patroclus, my leader of chivalry, straight for Lycians and Trojans to avenge your comrade's death." He struck Sthenelaus on the neck with a stone and tore the sinews out. Then Hector in the front rank fell back as far as a man casts a long goat spear in practice or in games, or in war when he faces murderous foemen, and so far the Achaeans pushed forward. Glaucus first wheeled about and killed Bathycles, Chalcon's son, who lived in Hellas, a man notable among the Myrmidons for riches and wealth. Bathycles nearly caught him, but Glaucus turned suddenly and stabbed him in the chest. The Achaeans were infuriated at the fall of so good a man. The Trojans were glad and rallied round the body, but the Achaeans came on unshrinking. Then Meriones got another Trojan, the brave soldier Laogonus, a son of Onitor, who was priest of Idaean Zeus and highly honored. He struck him under jaw and ear. The spirit of life quickly left him, and darkness covered him up. Then Aeneas let fly his spear against Meriones in the hope to hit him as he advanced under his shield. But he kept a steady eye and stooped forwards, avoiding the spear, which dumped into the ground behind. There it stood with quivering butt until Ares took its fierceness away. Aeneas was furious and called out, "Meriones, you do know how to dance, but my spear might have stopped your dancing for good and all if it had only hit you." Meriones answered, Aeneas, you do know how to fight, but you are a mortal man, after all, and you will not find it easy to kill every man alive who defends himself. I might hit you myself, and then where would your strong hands be? You would give the victory to me and your soul to Hades." Patroclus rated him for this. "My good man, why do you bandy words like this? You are wasting time. Taunts and jibes will not drive the Trojans away from the dead body. Many a man will fall before that. Words are potent in debate. Deeds in war decide your fate. Then don't go on piling up words, but fight." So Patroclus hurried him off to the thick of the action, and the noise rose far and wide, thudding and thumping of swords and spears on metal and leather, on shields and bucklers, as the thuds of the axes are heard afar when workmen fell the trees in the mountain forests. Now not even a man who knew him well could have known the noble Sarpedon, smothered from head to foot in blood and dust and showers of shafts. The crowds of men struggled about the body like a swarm of flies buzzing about a farmyard in springtime, when the milk runs over the pails and the bowls are doused with milk. And all the while Zeus did not turn away his eyes from the battle, but gazed at them, musing in his mind on Patroclus and his bloody deaths. Should Hector kill him there over Sarpedon's body and strip him of his armor, or should he add yet more to the number of the dead? At last he thought it best that Patroclus should kill yet more, and drive Hector back to the city walls. So first he made Hector's courage fail. Hector entered his car and turned to retreat, calling on the Trojans to follow. He knew the sacred scales of Zeus. Then not even the brave Lycians stood firm, but all fled away. Now they had seen their king lying pierced through the heart in the heap of corpses, for many had fallen over him at the time when Cronion tightened the strife. But the others tore the shining armor from his shoulders, and Patroclus sent it away to the camp. Then Zeus Cloud-gatherer said to Apollo, "Make haste now, my dear Phoebus. Take Sarpedon out of range and cleanse him of the black blood. Carry him far away and wash him in the river. Anoint him with ambrosia and clothe him in raiment incorruptible. Then give him to those two swift carriers, Sleep and Death, and they shall quickly set him down in the happy land of Lycia, where friends and kinsmen shall do the last rites with barrow and pillar, for that is the honor due to the dead." Apollo did not neglect his father's bidding. He went down from Ida into the battlefield. He carried the body of Sarpedon out of range and took it far away and washed it in the river. He anointed it with ambrosia and clothed it in raiment incorruptible. Then he gave it to the two swift carriers, Sleep and Death, who quickly set it down in the happy land of Lycia. Now Patroclus ordered Automaton to drive him after the Trojans and Lycians. Poor fool! He was quite blinded. If he had done as Achilles told him, he could have escaped Black Death. But always the will of Zeus is stronger than man, and Zeus put that temper into his heart. Who was the first, who was the last you killed, Patroclus, now the gods had summoned you to death? First Adristos and Autonous and Echeclos, Peramos Megades and Epistor and Melanippus, then Elysus and Mulius and Pilates. All these he killed, and the others were glad to escape. And then the Achaeans would have taken the proud city of Troy by the valor of Patroclus, for he went onwards like a storm, but Apollo stood on the wall to help the Trojans, intent upon his death. 3 times did Patroclus set his foot on a corner of the wall. 3 times Apollo dueled him back, rapping the shield with his immortal hands. When he tried the 4th time, like one more than man, Apollo shouted at him and said in plain words, "Back, Prince Patroclus! It is not fated that proud Troy shall fall to your spear, nor to Achilles, who is a much better man than you." Then Patroclus fell back a long way in fear of the wrath of Apollo Shootaphar. But Hector checked his horses at the Scaean gates, for he was in doubt whether to drive into battle again or recall his army to take shelter within the walls. As he was considering, Apollo appeared by his side in the form of a lusty young fellow Asius, who was Hector's own uncle, being brother of Hecabe and son of Dymas, who lived near the Sangarius in Phrygia. Apollo said then, in the shape of this man, "Why have you left the battle, Hector? You ought not to do it. I wish I were as much better than you as I am worse. You should soon be sorry you shirked. Hurry, make for Patroclus, and you may get him. Apollo may give you victory." As Apollo disappeared into the melee, Hector told Cebriones to whip the horses into battle. Apollo turned the Argives to flight and made the Trojans prevail, but Hector left the others alone and drove towards Patroclus. Then Patroclus leapt out of his car, holding the spear in his left hand. He picked up with his right a sharp, shining stone, just large enough to fill his hand. He did not try to keep clear of the fellow now. He threw with all his might, and his shot was not wasted, for it hit Cebriones, himself a bastard son of Priam, on the forehead as he held the reins. The stone crushed both brows into one and smashed the bone, and both eyes fell down in the dust in front of him. He rolled out of the car like a tumbler, and Patroclus said in mockery, "Bless my soul, there's a spring heel! What a neat header he takes! If he were at sea, he could fill many hungry bellies by diving for sea urchins. He would jump overboard in any weather, to judge from that excellent dive over car on land. I didn't know there were divers in Troy." He pounced on Cebriones like a lion which ravages the fold, until he has run through the chest, and his own courage is his destruction. "Ah, Patroclus, that was what came of your leap." And Hector leapt from his car to meet him, and there they fought as two lions fight over a deer's body, both hungry, both furious. There Patroclus, Meneuetiades, and glorious Hector were ready to tear each other to pieces. Hector laid hold of the head and would not let go. Patroclus held fast by the foot, and the two armies behind them were fighting too. It was like the struggle of east wind and south wind to shake the trees in a mountain dimble, oak and ash and smooth-barked kernel. How they beat the long boughs together with a rare great noise! What a crashing of cracking trunks! So Trojans and Danaans dashed together, dealing death, and neither thought of retreat. Round the body of Cebriones the sharp spears fell thick, the winged arrows flew from the string, showers of big stones battered the shields of the fighting men, and the dead man, amid the whirlwind of dust, lay grand in his own grandeur, forgetful of his horsemanship. So long as the sun bestrode the middle sky, those death-dealing showers went on from this side and that, but when the sun took his turn to ox-loosing time, the Achaeans became stronger beyond measure. They dragged away the body of Cebriones and stripped his armor, and Patroclus turned upon the Trojans again. Thrice he leapt on them like another god of war, with awful shouts. Thrice 9 men he killed. But at the fourth furious attack, then, Patroclus, the end of your life was in sight, for Phoebus was there in all his terrors. Patroclus did not see him coming, for the god was hidden in mist. He stood behind Patroclus. His eyes rolled in rage, and he slapped him between the shoulders with the flat of the hand. The helmet was knocked from his head and went rolling and rattling under the horse's feet. The plumes were dabbled in blood and dust. Never before had it been God's will that this plumed helmet should be fouled in the dust when it covered the head and brows of a man of the blood divine, Achilles. Then Zeus granted that Hector should wear it. Yet death was coming near him. Patroclus felt the spear in his hand broken to pieces. The great, strong, heavy-bladed spear, the tasseled shield with its belt fell from his shoulders. The corslet was stripped off his body by the great son of Zeus. His mind was blinded, his knees crickled under him. He stood there dazed. Then from behind a spear hit him between the shoulders. A Dardanian struck him, Euphorbus Panthoides, best of all his years-mates in spearmanship and horsemanship and fleetness of foot. He had already dismounted 20 since he drove out to learn his first lesson of war. His was the first blow, but it did not bring down Patroclus, and Euphorbus pulled out the spear and mixed again with the crowd. He could not stand up to Patroclus, even when naked and bare. But the god's blow and the spear together were too much for Patroclus, and he sought safety among his friends. When Hector saw him retreating and wounded, he came near and stabbed him in the belly. The blade ran through. He fell with a dull thud, and consternation took the Achaeans. So fell Patroclus, like a wild boar killed by a lion, when both are angry and both are parched with thirst, and they fight over a little mountain pool until the lion is too strong for the panting boar. Patroclus Meneuetiades had killed many men, but Hector Priamedes killed him. And then he vaunted his victory without disguise. "So, Patroclus, you thought that you could sack our city. You thought you would rob our women of the day of freedom and carry them off to your own country. Fool! In front of them are the horses of Hector, prancing out to battle. My spear is well known among my brave Trojans, for I defend them from the day of fate. Here you shall stay and feed the vultures. Ah, poor wretch, your Achilles is a good man, but he was no help to you, although no doubt he warned you earnestly when you started, and he stayed behind. Don't come back to me, my brave Patroclus, until you have stripped the blood-stained shirt from Hector's body. No doubt he must have said that, and you thought you could do it. No more sense in you than that." Patroclus replied, half fainting, "For this once, Hector, make your proud boast, for you are the victor by help of Zeus Cronides and Apollo, who mastered me. An easy thing. They stripped off my armor themselves. But if 20 men like you had confronted me, my spear would have slain them all on the spot. No, it was cruel fate that killed me, and Leto's son, and of men Euphorbus. You come third and take my armor. One thing I tell you, and you should lay it up in your mind. You have yourself not long to live. Already death and fate are beside you, and Achilles' Aeacides shall lay you low." Even as he spoke, the shadow of death covered him up. His soul left the body and went down to Hades, bewailing his lot, cut off in his manhood and strength. But Hector answered him, though dead, "What is this prophecy of certain death to me, Patroclus? Achilles may be the son of divine Thetis, but who knows if I may not strike him with my spear, and he may be the first to die." Then he set one foot upon the body, and treading it away from the spear, pulled out the spear, and went at once with the spear after the driver Automedon. He wanted to kill him too, but the immortal horses which the gods had given to Peleus were carrying him out of the way. Book 17. How they fought over the body of Patroclus.